Hey, today we're gonna react to a recent video with Alex O'Connor and Anil Seth, neuroscientist. So we're gonna react to that conversation between those two on one of the most confusing and honestly misunderstood topics right now, which is, can AI actually be conscious? Now, most people think this is just a question about intelligence. Like, if it talks like a human, acts like a human, it passes the Turing test, then it must be conscious, right? But here's the problem. That assumption quietly smuggles in a massive leap that behavior is enough for experience. But is that really true? Because that's exactly what's being challenged in this conversation. So Anil Seth is going to argue, if I'm right, I haven't really watched the whole video, that consciousness isn't just computation. That's what he's always talking about. It's deeply tied to biological processes, especially how a living system regulates itself, right? And while Alex O'Connor is going to push whether that's really necessary or whether a sufficiently advanced AI could still be conscious. He's going to question the assumptions, I'm pretty sure. So the real question is not, can AI act conscious, but is there something it's like to be an AI system? And this is where things get pretty tricky, right? And where most of the discussions completely really fall apart in my experience. So here's the challenge. I want to put this on the table before we even start the video, right? What would actually count as evidence that AI is conscious? Think about that and throw it out there in the live chat when you come in. What would actually count as evidence that an AI is really conscious? What are your thoughts? Put that down in the live chat, or if you're reviewing the video, put it down in the comments section. I'd really like to know what you think. Because think about it. If you say behavior is enough, then you're assuming consciousness equals function, right? And if you say behavior is not enough, then what would be enough, right? If an AI behaves exactly like a conscious being, but you still say it might not be conscious, then what possible test could ever confirm consciousness? And if the answer is, well, there is no test, then you've just admitted something really big here, that consciousness is not something we can detect objectively. It's something we infer, which is what I believe. And so we're kind of right back at that deeper issue. You don't directly observe consciousness. You infer it from other people's behavior, just like you infer the external world itself, right? So this just isn't about AI. We can expand it out. This is really about, what is consciousness? How do we know it exists? And whether objectivity even applies here at all, right? So let's get into the video. I'm going to pause at key moments and break down, some of the things I can catch, like maybe if something's being assumed, where the arguments are really strong and where they quietly fall apart. So yeah, let's go ahead and run this video. I'll go ahead and pull it right on up. Let's get going. Let's get it.
Okay. Thanks, Alex. What is the difference between intelligence and consciousness?
Both resist the kind of precise consensus definitions, but I think intuitively they are fundamentally different kinds of things. If we think about intelligence, it's about doing something. It could be about solving a complex problem or solving any kind of problem. But in general, it's about the capability to do things functionally, behaviorally. Consciousness is primarily about feeling and being rather than doing. It's in the words of Thomas Nagel, more than 50 years ago now.
Yeah.
He said, it was 1976, I think, that for a conscious organism or a conscious anything, there is something it feels like to be that organism. And he doesn't mean feeling that it has to be necessarily emotional or anything like that. Simply the idea that there's some sort of interiority, there's some kind of experiencing going on. It feels.
Yeah, so he's talking about basic phenomenal consciousness, you know, just the awareness, not necessarily being aware of something in particular. That's what they call objects of consciousness. You know, philosophers will call it objects or appearances within consciousness. But he's talking about the very condition for one to observe objects and concepts and imaginary things and so on and so on. That's called phenomenal consciousness.
Like something to be me, to be you, but
Space 44 super agents, the next thing you can't live without. No setup, just say hello.
probably not to be a chair. And I think this distinction between feeling and doing is intuitively right. It doesn't mean they're unrelated. I think they're certainly related in things that exist, in living creatures, for instance, but they may not have to go together in general.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You just wrote an essay, a prize-winning essay. Congratulations, by the way. The Mythology of Conscious AI. And the reason I opened with that question is because you felt it important to tease apart those two concepts. And that's got a lot to do with the fact that in our search to understand consciousness, to figure out what's going on and why there is anything it's like to be anything, we look to what we know, which is that I know I'm conscious, you know you're conscious, and we know that there's intelligence, to some degree, in both of our brains, I like to think. And so we kind of make this assumption that maybe they always come together in that kind of way. But you start talking about this to try and pull those concepts apart a bit, right?
It's one aspect of the discussion. So I think the overall framing for this is to try to reason through what has become quite a confusing topic, which is whether artificial intelligence could be conscious. It seems to be intelligent, at least in some ways, but there are various views and a lot of kind of, I think, somewhat unexamined views about whether AI can be not only smart, but also conscious.
Yeah, so this kind of gets into intelligence versus consciousness. You know, they're two different things. Hey, Neil, how you doing today?
Doing all right.
Good. What do you think so far? They're just getting started.
I mean, so far I would agree that there's a distinct difference between being intelligent and being conscious, or, you know, being awareness itself.
Exactly. Yeah, that makes this whole AI consciousness thing kind of tricky, you know, because for some reason it's just real easy for us to assume other humans and even other animals are conscious because of their behavior. But when it comes to these AI systems, we're a little reluctant. And I think it has to do with, you know, they don't look like us. You know, they don't have all the features that humans do. And I think for me, that's kind of like that uncanny valley argument that, you know, for some reason, it's just a hang up. And, you know, it's kind of funny how, you know, if you remembered, I used to follow this stuff even way back in the early 2000s, this AI stuff, that one day computers will pass the Turing test and it'll be conscious at that point, and they can never get it to pass the Turing test. You know, even though, you know, you had these super computer beating people in, games like chess and stuff like that, they still never passed the Turing test, you know. And they said, but one day they will. And then they did, like 7 times over. And for some reason, everybody's still moving the goalpost. It's like, yeah, but that's not really enough, really. There's got to be something else. And they keep pushing it back. And I'm wondering, when are they ever going to get to that thing that proves it? You know, it's like, I don't know. I think people are just really skeptical, you know?
Well, I mean, I think that skepticism is warranted. I mean, I'm trying to remember I've seen this video. I'm just trying to remember. I think it's brought up where it's like, there are people who want to mistake the map for the territory, that they get too caught up in the analogy and think the analogy is real, just because a mind or a brain can be compared to a computer, that doesn't make it a actual computer.
I mean, like, I follow the logic. Like, I think I saw interview with Neil deGrasse Tyson and David Chalmers, I think it was. And they were saying, well, it just seems pretty like Neil deGrasse Tyson would say, a no-brainer. Like, if you just replaced each neuron one by one with the equivalent of a processor, like a bit or a qubit or something like that in a computer system, if you just replaced it one by one doing the same exact function, then it seems pretty common sense that you wouldn't even notice it. You would still be you. Your neurons would just be replaced, kind of like replacing your arms or fingers or something like that.
Funny to say though that that is also brought up in here, and I wonder if you would agree though that the response to that, if you agree with that or not.
Yeah, it seems logical. Like, it doesn't seem like it should be a problem, but for some reason, like, they've done that already. Like with fruit flies, they had this experiment about 2 months ago, where they replaced every neuron in a fly with a simulation. And sure enough, the fly started doing fly stuff. The simulation started scouring for food, doing all the things a fly does. But no one, they ran tests on it, and they really realized, well, he's not really experiencing anything. Like, no one thought he was the same as the fly in that way, right? And which was kind of,
well, yeah. I mean, if we play the video more, it's like it gets into like the whole, just because you can conceive of something doesn't mean that it can actually happen.
Exactly. Yeah, let's get into the video and see where it goes.
And one part of the discussion is to examine our own psychological biases. Why might we even think that an AI system could feel as well as do intelligent looking things? And part of that is indeed to recognize that just because things go together in us, like intelligence and consciousness, doesn't mean they have to go together in general. Across all living creatures, I think there is this strong relationship. So it's certainly the case that for certain kinds of conscious experience, you need to have certain kinds of cognitive capability. So, for instance, if you're going to have the experience of regret, then you need to have the cognitive competence to envisage alternative courses of action and their possible outcomes. If you don't have like the functional capability to do that, then you can only really experience something like disappointment or maybe even sadness. So the relationship goes that way, but it's not clear that in virtue of being cognitive in that way or intelligent in some way, that you have to do that in a way that is accompanied by consciousness.
So you said this has become quite a confusing topic. It's a bit of a sort of buzzy issue. I'm almost sort of hesitant to talk about it. In fact, when I've done episodes about consciousness, I've kind of avoided the topic of AI consciousness because it's like asking whether we live in a simulation or something. It's like people are talking about it, and there's kind of nothing super interesting to say about it. People kind of go, oh, like, maybe, who knows? We wouldn't be able to tell. But you've written a really interesting essay, not just sort of going like, well, look, how are we going to be able to tell if it's conscious, but specifically talking about the nature of consciousness and its relation to living organisms. And I think that weirdly, you kind of want to start by by pulling apart the two concepts, you want to say, let's not assume that all consciousness and all intelligence works the same. But the place you end up is kind of where our intuitions start with, which is that,
that kind of reminds me of Bernardo Kastrup. He's one of those AI consciousness deniers.
Mm-hmm.
So he's like, as an analytic idealist, like a naturalist idealist, he says consciousness always shows up as a biological human system or an animal system. Mm-hmm. So it seems like nature will always present to you consciousness from a third person point of view as like another living system, but it never shows up as a computer or something like that. And something about that argument, I'm not really sure that's really all that convincing to me, mm-hmm. because we're just now creating computers that can possibly be conscious. So of course we've never seen it before, mm-hmm. in the past, right?
Mm-hmm.
But so why would it just follow that it can't be possible?
So you're pointing out something interesting though, where it's like, there's the idealist Bernardo Kastrup, and as far as I can tell, Seth is mostly a materialist.
Yeah,
they're both agreeing on this point that it seems like only biological systems can be conscious, mm-hmm. but not all idealists believe that. So they're
right,
and not all materialists believe that. So there is pushback in both camps about what.
That's right. And I just see that may be true. It may be the case that consciousness will only show up in biological systems, but I don't think no one really knows that. I don't see a contradiction necessarily.
I agree with you, but I'm also one of those. I would say I'm one of those people that has no issue where it's like the data we have so far at least points to biological systems only being able to be the only things that have a conscious experience. So as far as I can tell, that's the truth. But if new data crops up and actually shows AI is actually experiencing something, then there you go.
Yeah, and I would used to be very tempted to say, well, if AI did ever become conscious, or if people make the argument that it could, then that would be an appeal to like strong emergence, because what is it about just processing information that should equal into an experience? Again, two different categories. But on the other hand, when you think of intelligence, that is a mode of consciousness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it seems like consciousness can be intelligent, mm-hmm. based on its experience. So maybe there's a relation there where it's not really strong emergence at all. It would be a weakly emergent thing.
I mean, I feel like one of the questions that gets to the heart of the issue would be, is consciousness computational? And if it's not, then I think it would be very we could most likely rule out that AI could ever be conscious.
Right, exactly. And yeah, I sort of lean that way too, though. Like Roger Penrose makes that argument, mm-hmm. That there's no equation for understanding the equation, and that's points to that. Anyways, let's keep going.
Yeah, like to get this consciousness, you need to be essentially a biological organism. And I want to maybe just talk through how we sort of track that trajectory. So where to start? I mean, the idea of AI consciousness is the idea of mechanistic consciousness, that whatever it is our brains are doing to produce consciousness can be replicated with a machine. And there are thought experiments to this degree of like taking every single neuron in your brain and just like replacing it with like an electrode or a transistor or whatever the relevant analogous part would be. And that if I did that for one of your neurons, just swap them over, probably everything would function. You wouldn't really notice any difference. And slowly over time, it feels like we should be able to, in principle, swap the biological electro signals in your brain with mechanical electro signals. But presumably at some point you think this would sort of break down, or it wouldn't work in the first place, or there's some kind of barrier between those two ways of trying to produce experience. And I just want to know why you think that's the case.
I think that's a good place to start. But let me just make one sort of nuance to how you set this up. And this is that the idea of AI being conscious is not just that the idea that it's the result of the operation of some mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
It's usually the more specific claim that the kind of mechanism in question is implementing computations, and it's in virtue of those computations that consciousness happens.
Mm.
This is in the philosophical assumption of computational functionalism rather than functionalism in general. Functionalism in general is the idea, it's quite a liberal idea really, that consciousness is a property of the functional organization of a system, like a brain, an embodied, embedded brain. But that can encompass things like its internal structure, its causal architecture, can be pretty specific. Computational functionalism is a subset of that, and it says that it's the computations that matter. And typically, when people think about computations, they think about computation in a sense inspired by Alan Turing, which is that computations in the Turing sense are independent of the material, independent of the substrate. There's a sort of sharp division, if you like, between the software and the hardware. The algorithm is what matters, and the algorithm is a mapping from one sequence of symbols to another sequence of symbols, and it's that mapping that matters.
Mm-hmm.
That's the sound of an American oil hard at work. Want to be a part of it? Listen up.
Hello. So it's quite a strong claim, really.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the claim that I think is really, it starts to, it looks like it's quite on shaky ground the more you examine it. And one way to examine it is indeed this kind of neural replacement scenario that you mentioned. So this is often sort of put on the table when people want to justify the idea that consciousness could be implemented in silicon just as readily as it can be implemented in carbon.
Right.
And as you put it, the thought experiment goes back to, I think David Chalmers popularized it, but it's got ancestry before that, is indeed, I'd say one neuron, I replace it with a perfectly functionally equivalent silicon alternative. And it has to be kind of perfect for the thought experiment to carry through, because if it isn't, then you can immediately say, oh, well, those differences, they may matter. And I can do this for one neuron. Neurons fire spikes, why not? And almost certainly nothing will happen to your consciousness. If I do it for 10, is anything going to happen? Probably not. Then I can do it for 1 million, 86 billion. And so this is pushing the intuition that if it doesn't matter for 10, why should it matter for any number? Therefore, substrate independence.
Yeah, that's what it is. Substrate independence is the argument there. And Dave asked, why does consciousness have to be biological? I don't know. That's what's in question. That's what we're talking about. How is biological not mechanical? Chemistry is based on quantum mechanics, and quantum mechanics isn't necessarily mechanical, because when we think of mechanics, we think of classical logic. What do you think, Neil? Well, she is out. So
sorry.
No problem.
I was muted apparently. I was just going to say, I wanted Seth to get his point across, and then we can discuss.
Okay.
It more.
Sure.
Matters is the sort of functional organization. Firstly, I think it just begs the question. Ned Block pointed this out, another philosopher. He said, well, maybe in fact it would be the case that if consciousness depended in some way on the actual stuff, then as you replace more and more neurons, you would experience consciousness fading, or consciousness may fade. You may not even notice as the subject of that. So it does kind of beg the question. But I think there's a more fundamental problem, which is that, like many thought experiments of this kind, the more you look at it, the less conceivable it is. It's really, really unlikely that you can perfectly replace a biological neuron with a silicon alternative.
Yep.
In fact, you can probably only replace it with another neuron and probably the same one.
Yeah.
So there's one example which I really like is that there are many examples you can choose, but one example is that some neurons fire spikes to clear the waste products of metabolism.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you replicate that in silicon? You've got to give the silicon a kind of metabolism too, and
Yes.
that's not the kind of thing that silicon can have. So that thought experiment, to me, it underpins a fundamental difference, I think, between brains and Turing-based digital computers, which is that in brains, you just can't separate what they are from what they do in a way that's sort of enshrined into how we think about the kind of computers that we're familiar with and the kind that are running all the server farms that underpin all the language models we talk to.
All right. So yeah, he's saying that it's begging the question, this whole idea about substrate independence. So it may just be a brute fact that carbon is the way to get experience to arise somehow, I guess, or in an idealist way for consciousness to embody that system.
And I think he brings up a really good point of, it's like, the neuron isn't just doing one function. It's responsible for many things. Yeah. And, the silicon is just doing one thing.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Because you know how complicated a neuron is?
I mean, it's the statement, people throw around. It's like that, the human brain is like the most complex thing that there is. And it's like, I don't think that's an understatement.
Yeah.
Or an overstatement.
It is. I mean,
yeah.
It's like intelligence is a collective thing. Like a neuron is far more complex than people really assume. It's just not like an on-off switch. It's kind of like a dynamic system. So like, I mean, really a neuron is just a cell. It receives signals, processes signals, send those signals to other neurons. But the way it does it is extremely intricate. When I looked at this stuff, right? I used to try to study biology. I actually did take a course in biology in college. And that was just a few years ago, actually. And it's like an electrical chemical hybrid system, is what they act like. So it's like, unlike what would you say, a digital circuit, a neuron operates through electrical signals, chemical signaling, and those layers are constantly interacting. It's like so much internal complexity. So I just don't know if that really is going to work, just replacing a neuron with a simple transistor. I don't think that's really the way to go.
Yeah, that's so interesting because like when you got to think about how far you want to push this, because somebody will say, no, but you don't understand. Like, we're going to just perfectly replicate the neuron, and then we'll perfectly replicate the body as well if we need to come up with metabolism, sure. And it's like, okay, but to what degree? So like on a macro level, you look at a neuron and it's got inputs and outputs. So you replicate that with silicon, but it's not quite complex enough. It doesn't have all of the inner workings. So you go down onto the level of the parts of a neuron and you replicate each one and you stick them together. But it's still not quite there. Well, let's just keep going deeper until what? You get to like the molecular level. And it's like, I'm just going to create a perfect replica of a neuron at a certain level of resolution. In order to do that, you would just be creating a neuron.
Exactly.
It wouldn't even be, you'd be below the level of recognizable like silicon. It would just be electrons and protons that you're sort of ordering in some way. And so it's like, maybe you could create a silicon creature, but you kind of have to be a bit more specific and be a bit more detailed. And what you're actually doing is not building a computer and calling it conscious, but just building this Frankensteinian biological being and calling it artificial just because you've created it with your bare hands.
Which I think is pretty reasonable. I mean, there's a whole other branch of sort of artificial things, and which is synthetic biology, and we have people creating brain organoids in synthetic biology labs, which are clusters of cells, which are they're neurons, and they're usually derived from human stem cells. So they're in fact human neurons, and they wire up together and they start to show activity. They don't really do anything very interesting, at least not yet. But indeed, they're made out of the same stuff. Now, it's hard to say whether we can't say for sure that is a necessary condition. But if you're creating something that is literally made out of the same stuff, then that whole uncertainty goes away. You no longer face the question of whether you could do it in silicon, because you're not doing it in silicon anymore.
So the position that you land on, and mythology is a weak term and a strong term, because it's not saying, this is complete nonsense, but it's definitely saying that there's a bit of weird stuff going on that we need to iron out. Do you land on the position of, like, based on my understanding of consciousness and the way that brains work, AI just cannot be conscious? Or is it a more reserved, like, let's slow down a bit here, like, maybe it's possible, but the general conversation around it is a bit confused? Like, how strong is the condemnation of this view?
I'm very skeptical, but I think in discussions about what kinds of things are or could be conscious, we need a certain residual humility.
Sure.
I think simply because we don't know. We know, so I'm a phenomenal realist as well. I think conscious experiences exist. So there is something about, so from that starting point, I think there's something about the embodied, embedded biological brain that is sufficient for consciousness. The game is to figure out what that is. Now, computational functionalism of the sort that would license claims that language models or other kinds of digital silicon AI could be conscious is making one specific bet that below the level of the algorithmic description, things don't matter. But there are many other things that might matter that are much more tied to a biological substrate than an algorithm, which by definition is divorceable from it. So I think that anyone who says that AI is conscious or impossible for it to be conscious is overstating what can be reasonably said.
I think another thing that people don't take into account is all the consciousness also depends on, your evolutionary history, that's encoded in your DNA and stuff like that. It's also dependent on your environment, your hormone levels, different perceptual organs and stuff like that. Like, computers don't have all that, it's just sort of an attempt to stitch it together to make something conscious. I'm not sure if it meets the test on that either, though.
No, I agree, because it seems like that, it's like, obviously it seems like, conscious, that there's human consciousness, but there's a wide spectrum, there's bat conscious, ant, whatever an ant is thinking about or doing. But it's like all these things that they have in common is that they are a biological system. So.
And I think they tried to test some of these things, like they call them adversarial Turing tests, where they try to break the system with like unusual introspective questions. And they're looking for consistency and depth, not just like surface level fluency that you see like in these LLMs and stuff like that when you ask questions. So, they're trying to get around the faking of behavior to see if they can pick up on certain things that'll prove some kind of internal subjective perspective somehow,
Is it? It just seems like that's just so hard to do, though. Like, because
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, we can't get inside someone else's mind. It's just one of those things where we just have to. It just has to be baked into our axiom that this person is having a subjective experience.
Yeah, because if you think about it, if the AI systems are super intelligent, then they could easily fool us, no matter what our tests were. You know, like it's just programmed to test us. You know, like I'm just going to ask my AI to evaluate its own answer and revise them under uncertainty. You know,
that's why
it's gonna give itself away.
That's why I think the computational question will be the deciding factor, because I think, like, if we could definitively say that consciousness can be reduced down to computation, then I think it would just have to be, we would just have to assume then that AI eventually would become conscious. And then, but if we can show that it's not, that consciousness can't be reduced down to computation, then I think we can make the opposite argument. Without ever, going.
Having said that,
without, because we can't go inside someone else's mind. It's like, I think that's like just the best we'd be able to come up with.
Yeah, exactly. Raman said yes, because there is a possible overlap between the most intelligent AI and the dumbest human. For sure.
I think digital silicon AI is...
Wow, look at this. 94% of people believe company culture is important.
Is so unlikely. And I think the reason I think it's so unlikely is partly because there are many reasons why we are likely to over-attribute consciousness to these things that say more about our own cognitive biases, these conflations of intelligence and consciousness and the specific seductions of language as something that draws us in. And so I think that says more about ours and about the system, but more fundamentally, because of this deep way in which you can't disentangle what brains are from what they do, it's a property some people call generative entrenchment. This makes it very unlikely that the computational level, indeed, even if there is one in the brain, that makes it very unlikely that that's what matters, that can carry the load of everything that brains do.
Yeah.
And if you put those together, then I think there's good reason to be very, very skeptical that AI as we know it now is capable of consciousness.
Yeah. We'll get back to the show in just a moment. But first, on days like today, when I'm working and recording multiple episodes,
I mean it in this metaphysically loaded sense in what you mean. What is the essence of the universe, of reality? You know, we can get to that. But I don't think I'm making any kind of claim that's that strong or that controversial. I'm completely happy in this conversation to think of what something does as related to what it is, and if you ask what it is, you can pull it apart a bit more from at least a methodological reductionism, and you can explain what it is in terms of what it does at lower levels. It's just that the more you do that, the less flexible you become with respect to realizing those same kinds of functions in different kinds of materials. So it just takes something very, very uncontroversial, like, I don't know, building a bridge across a river. Only certain kinds of materials are up to the job. You just can't build a bridge out of string. It's not going to. Maybe you can actually if you wired. Anyway, it's not the ideal substrate. You can't build it out of cream cheese or water.
That's something really interesting to keep in mind. Is some people, we want, there's some camps that say, well, you can build consciousness out of anything. That's not really what's important. What's important is the function, what it does, like how a brain, consciousness is what the brain does. Therefore it follows that if you just create something that does the same thing, then you'll have consciousness. That would prove it. And then people who just are committed to that idea will just forever be disappointed because they're unwilling to come off of that. Like when is enough test that you can run before you kind of give up that idea? Because it may be that you're just kind of stuck on wishful thinking, like a commitment to an ideal, instead of just saying, look, we may be wrong about this shit. It may be, that consciousness just isn't what function is,
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
And Robin says, we don't actually have actual AI yet. They're simply large language models, but I suspect we are only beginning to unlock the potential. That is very highly debatable, because if you talk to all the experts in AI, like the founders, like the godfather of AI, they all say already that the systems are not only intelligent, they're conscious. They're already talking about that. They're already, but you don't know whether they're just trying to hype up their own product or whether they're trying to just get a lot of subscribers and likes to their platform, or whatever the case is. There's all kinds of motivations that you can apply, but that would be kind of fallacious reasoning. But still, it makes you suspicious. Like, why are they so quick to say, oh, AI is already we're already in danger. We're already about to go extinct, because these things are not only intelligent, they're conscious and they have their own agendas and stuff.
Yeah.
You've heard that, right?
Yeah. I'd say I fall somewhere in the middle. Like, if we're just looking at what AI is, artificial intelligence, it's like, first of all, like they were discussing in the beginning, you can't conflate intelligence with consciousness.
Right.
It's like to me, it's like we have created artificial intelligence, but I would not go so far as to say that what we have created so far is conscious AI. And to me, it's, we also need to distinguish between the differences of the different sorts of AI, because there's simple AI, which is just a program that does one single task, which is what these large language models are doing. And traditionally what people would think of AI as consciousness, which is general AI. But it's like, it's not even a settled thing of like if general AI would be conscious or not in the first place. So.
Yeah. Once your computer starts saying, you know what, screw you, I'm not answering you, I'm not doing what you want me to do, maybe then you can start seeing behavior that adds up. I don't know.
Well, it's like, it's like we're not even close, as far as I can tell, to something like general AI where it can do more than just one sort of program.
Right. I'm going to skip ahead to get some of the parts.
Let's chat about the first big AI agent trend for 2026.
Okay, I see. Okay, so I want to talk for a moment about, you mentioned this briefly earlier, and you've written about this too, about the way in which specifically like LLMs have just burst open the door to credulity about conscious AI, because we've got artificial intelligence doing all kinds of different things. There's in a self-driving car, like chess computers, whatever, but very rarely are you playing against a chess computer and think, gosh, it's so good at knowing how to checkmate me, it must be conscious. There's something about language models that make people go, there's something funny going on. And if the brain is making predictions, if the brain is sort of working like a prediction machine, people might say that's kind of how LLMs work. They don't actually speak exactly, they don't use language, they just predict what you would like to see next, what word you would like to see next, and then they sort of successfully produce it. There's something a bit like eerie maybe about the language thing. And you write about how it's a little bit suspicious that something that so obviously is just trying to mimic human behavior has made us go, oh, maybe it's conscious.
I think that's part of the mythology aspect. That there's a sense in which some motivated reasoning is going on here. Like we're still very human exceptionalist in our outlook.
Yeah,
I think, and we can think of kind of the march of science and philosophy as repeated attempts to challenge or at least nuance this human exceptionalism, because there are things that are distinctive about human beings, but we're not at the center of the universe. We're not unrelated to all other animals. And I think cognitively and in terms of consciousness, we're part of nature as well. Language has been one of those things that we think sets us apart.
Yes.
This is actually under pressure in many directions, right? It's under pressure from LLMs because I think it'd be unfair to say they don't have some form of language.
Unkind.
I don't mind being unkind to the AI, but we shouldn't be for other reasons, for our own psychological health.
No, I know what you mean.
And other animals, there are all these interesting actually applications of AI now to decode non-human animal communication. So I think language is going to be itself a little bit on unstable ground as something that motivates our human exceptionalism, which is part of this mythology of AI. But
do you see that human exceptionalism and anthropomorphizing our tools could be playing a role in why everyone's so scared about AI taking over the world and having its own agency? And they call it the alignment problem. It's not an alignment with human goals. And some of this could be just irrational fears. What do you think, Neil?
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely see the human exceptionalism element in there. It's like, I mean, for the longest time, we didn't even want to, entertain the idea that other animals might be conscious. Like,
like that Destiny guy, he still feels like that.
Like it's like, oh, animals, they feel pain differently or less pain. It's like, it's like I feel like one of the even if we don't completely agree with the vegan viewpoint, it's like I feel like they definitely brought some important things up, about animal suffering, animal consciousness. It's just like, these are things we need to take seriously.
Didn't Alex O'Connor used to be a vegan, or still is? I'm not sure.
Used to be, yeah.
Used to be, yeah. I remember he had a debate with Matt Dillahunty on that one time. Mm-hmm. And Matt thought that was kind of weird. But that's Matt. Anybody that doesn't agree with him is something's wrong with them.
Yeah. Let me come back to the point. So you mentioned chess playing programs and people not projecting consciousness into a chess playing program. That's probably true, although when DeepMind had AlphaGo, there was this famous move. Mm-hmm. I don't remember people thinking that AlphaGo was conscious when it played move 37 or whatever the number was. But I still think there might have been a temptation to project some kind of mind into there, just a very uncanny one. Yeah. The example I think is easier is AlphaFold, which is another AI system developed by DeepMind, which helps you predict the structure of proteins. Very, very useful. Mm-hmm. I've never heard anyone describe this or worry that it might be experiencing things when it's doing its protein folding algorithmic acrobatics. But under the hood, it's very, very similar to LLMs. It's a bunch of neural networks and transformers running on silicon hardware, tuned up in different ways, trained on different data. But if somebody thinks that GPT is conscious but AlphaFold isn't, I'd be really interested in what justifies that distinction. It's kind of hard to justify.
Yeah, and it seems to just be sort of that it passes the Turing test, right? That it is indistinguishable for us from a conscious agent. But again, that's a very sort of it looks this way towards us rather than towards the thing, and it's so easy to be fooled by these kinds of things.
Base 44 super agents. Careful, there's no going back. No setup. Just say hello.
That's right. That's why, I think if we are too tempted by seeing things through the lens of what a conscious human being is like and bind consciousness, language, and intelligence too close together, this can lead to both false positives and false negatives. We can see consciousness when it's not there in the statistical acrobatics of LLMs, and we might miss consciousness where it really is.
Yeah, I think that falls under the problem of underdetermination. Possibly here. I don't know. I have to pause the video every once in a while, otherwise I'll get kicked, by the way.
Understandable.
I'm gonna have to come up with some commentary every 2 minutes. But yeah, you can do like illusion and susceptibility test. Like humans have characteristic perceptual illusions for us, right? Like, does the AI exhibit systematic human-like perceptions, possibly like ambiguous figures that we might see? Do they kind of have something equal to that? Like maybe just context dependent illusions or something? Like it just seems like conscious systems may share structured ways of being wrong if they were conscious, and we should be able to test for that. I don't know, just like none of these tests directly access, like you said, Nell, the subjective experience itself. They only measure structured behavior still. So we're still in that trap. I don't know how we're going to get out of that trap to conclude one way or the other.
Yeah, no, it's really difficult. And, like you said, it's like, it's not just the false positives, it's also the false negatives. It's like, right. It's like if you came across someone who couldn't speak, couldn't see, strip them of all their five senses, would you say that they're not conscious?
Right. And people in comas, we come to learn that they tell stories when they were in years of being in a coma. They overheard conversation. They have all this veridical evidence that they actually overheard conversations, and people were assuming that they were just in a coma and unconscious, And I saw one story where the guy was like, yeah, I wanted to tell you guys, no, I can hear everything. I'm conscious of everything. That must be miserable, man. Anyways.
Descartes famously, to establish his mind-body dualism, keeping them separate, the way he gets there is just by saying, like, well, I can conceive of myself existing without a body, and I can certainly conceive of my body existing without my mind, just like a dead corpse. And although they might be tied up in various ways, the fact that they are conceptually different means that they are different things. They might coincide, but they're literally conceptually, separable. And that's basically his sort of principal grounds for saying that they are different types of things. I want to ask you if you can imagine yourself without a body. And most people, I think, sort of go like, yeah, sure, I can sort of imagine floating around in the void. But I mean, given everything that you know about consciousness and your understanding of how it works, can you actually make sense of some kind of conscious being that has no embodiment whatsoever? Or is that actually something that you now, given your views, sort of can't imagine?
Embodiment in the sense of having a physical substrate.
Let's say that, yeah.
Or in having a body interacting with an environment.
No, just having a physical...
Okay, because I just mentioned that because one can think of, let's say, an organoid as it has a physical substrate, but it doesn't have senses or motor effectors or legs or anything. It doesn't have limbs. So it's kind of disembodied in the sense that we might use embodiment
but it has no sort of
science.
Contact with the outside world or anything.
No.
But I think he's talking about like a ghost, like some kind of spirit, like on dualism or something like that. I think that's what he was referring to.
But no, I mean like not even having that.
Okay.
Can you imagine? I mean, even like conceptually, Can you imagine just sort of existing in the void with no physical?
I think conceptual imagination of this sort is too low a bar. I don't set much store by it. Yes, you know, I mean, they're concepts. I can create a concept in which there is a disembodied consciousness.
Yeah.
Can write stories about it. But I think this is, you can't really use that to carry much weight.
Yeah, sure.
It's a problem with these kinds of conceivability arguments in general, I think. So it's a bit like, can I imagine a Boeing 747? Well, they're out of service now. Can I imagine a Boeing 787 fly backwards through the air?
Yeah.
Well, yes, of course I can imagine it. I can picture it.
Yeah, right.
But the more I know about aerodynamics and engineering, you know, nomologically, so given the laws of physics as they are, you can't have planes that fly backwards.
Yeah.
So that's where I land. Yes, conceptually, I think it's possible to imagine these things. But if I want to understand how things are in the world as it is, with the laws of nature as they are, then the more I know about the brain, the body, how intimate these connections are, and how explanatory they are as well.
Yeah, this goes into what Dave mentioned. Like, you know, why can't there be consciousness substrate independent, like in a computer? Because he can conceive of it. So he was actually asking, he's like, well, I can conceive of a conscious AI, so why not? But that's not the problem. Like, we know we can conceive of it. Everyone can conceive of a lot of things, but in reality, does it really play out that way? That's the question.
Yeah. And I feel like this also, you know, I know no metaphysics has really been brought up, but like, you know, would you say that this is one of the issues that idealists might face, though? Like the trying to conceive of an immaterial consciousness when, you know, if we're just looking at the data, that really is hard to, like, you know, wrap your mind around.
Say that again. Like, what do you mean exactly?
So, like, you know, like, you know, under idealism, there's, you know, the immaterial consciousness is fundamental reality, and, you know, I feel like when it comes to like different metaphysical frameworks, like take, you know, materialism, for example, it's like, you know, you can easily conceive of like that's not conceptually hard to think of. And even like when you think of something like panpsychism, where you can, you know, still say consciousness is fundamental, but you're also saying that, you know, consciousness and the physical are fundamentally intertwined, like they're both fundamental. It's like I can also, you know, that's also not that hard to conceive of. But then when you say that,
I get what you're saying. Yeah, like one of the attractions to panpsychism is it gives a structure, like a substrate for consciousness, because we always recognize consciousness as embodied in the physical, measurable sense, right? So yeah, idealists do face pressure from conceivability style arguments, but I guess the challenge depends heavily on, you know, what kind of idealism is being defended. So, like, if you kind of think about what is the conceivability argument really doing, right? So I would say like a typical conceivability argument is something like, well, if we can coherently conceive of a world physically identical to ours without consciousness, like, you know, you hear theists talk about this all the time. And consciousness is not logically entailed by physical facts, you know. And I think David Chalmers might have said something like that too, but you know, idealism would say, well, reality is fundamentally mental or experiential. Consciousness is the basic epistemology. So a critic can flip the same style of reasoning. They could challenge the idealist and say, well, if we can conceive of an immaterial consciousness, that exists without any stable world or like of a structured experience, then consciousness alone wouldn't entail the kind of stable law-like reality idealists claim that exists, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Or more bluntly, they could say, like, if consciousness is fundamental, then why does it necessarily generate structured, consistent realities instead of this chaotic sort of or solipsistic sort of experience? So, you know, yeah, they're challenged. You know, like, why should consciousness give rise to stable, shared, structured reality at all is really the question. And I guess what I would say is that reality is not random consciousness, but structured mind-like order. Like you see, like these laws and patterns and regularities. So, you know, multiplicity and instability that we experience sort of arise from a misperception within that unified consciousness. So just because we can imagine alternative versions doesn't mean that they're metaphysically coherent, you know, and that's really where an idea is. Because, you know, it's just like you say, like,
Oh, Scott, you became super quiet.
Oh, did I go? Am I better now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I was just saying, like, the problems with panpsychism and materialism are metaphysical. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's where the tensions are, not necessarily anything with the conceivability, you know, like, you know, you have the combination problems, you have the evidential problem with panpsychism and materialism, you know, that's where the tension is. That's where I think the idealist has room to challenge back. But yeah, to be honest with you, idealists do face a conceivability style challenge.
Yeah. And I'm not even saying that, you know, because it's hard to conceive, it must be false. It's just like, it seems like if one of the goals is to try to convince as many people as possible that, you know, idealism seems like the most likely metaphysical view to be true, that's a real stumbling block.
Yeah.
Because people want to be able to conceive of, you know, if you're saying this is the most fundamental thing of reality, it's like, well, and, you know, it's, you know, this is the most simple fundamental thing, then it's like they want to be able to easily be able to conceive of it, you know.
Well, yeah, and one neuroscientist, his name is Donald Hoffman. I think you know who he is. He's really been challenged a lot with that, and especially for him because he's looking to science to kind of move the needle one way or the other on the whole idealistic framework, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So like they ask him the same thing. Why do we get stable patterns and mathematical worlds instead of just chaos and arbitrary experience? If reality is fundamentally consciousness, right? They ask him that all the time. And he never says reality is a single uniform consciousness. What he says is reality is made of conscious agents and a network of interactions. So not one mind, not matter, but many interacting experiential systems. And he has a framework for that. You know, it goes all the way back to his, you know, perception evolved to maximize fitness, not reveal truth. You know, and he's got the user interface theory of consciousness. Like, you know, like desktop icons are like stable structures. So they're sort of analogous to what we see. So, yeah, he goes into all that stuff. And I think one day we ought to do a reaction on that, too. But yeah, it really gets deep into that. But yeah, like I say, I do believe that conceivability argument really does challenge idealism, though, for sure.
Then it becomes, you know, it becomes less. It doesn't really mean anything to say that I can conceive it.
Yeah, and I think that also the reason I asked you that was because there's a level at which you can conceive something, and then upon learning new information, you suddenly can't. Like a child can imagine a plane flying backwards because you just picture it in your head. But once you know how planes work, once you know how lift is generated, it's like you actually kind of now can't imagine the plane flying backwards. I mean, you can literally imagine a physical object moving across the sky, but you can't imagine it flying backwards because flight is a physical concept that is applicable to the laws of physics as we know it, you know. And once you understand on a deeper level, like it's just not even something you can properly conceive of, unless you're just sort of intentionally fooling yourself. And if you know or are convinced that consciousness is a product of living systems, then maybe sort of Descartes was just wrong. That you shouldn't be able to conceive of such a thing, at least in the real world, you know.
So when you swing down steep and the club head is above this line, you can see how the face wants to be wide open. This means you...
I think that's, yeah, the more you know about it, the less likely it becomes that these things are separable. This goes to the neural replacement thought experiment as well. If you don't know anything about neurons, it's very easy to imagine that you could replace one with something made of silicon. Or if you've kind of reified the metaphor of the brain being a computer to think that it really is a computer, then you might also think that you can replace a neuron with a silicon thing, because computationally you might be able to say they could be equivalent. But the more you know about how real neurons work, what they do, how their collective behavior self-organizes and assembles and changes over time, then just like a plane flying backwards, it becomes less and less conceivable for the world in which we live, for the kinds of things in the physical world which we have.
Yeah, we were just talking about Matthew Cobb before we started recording. I just had him on my show, and he's got this book, The Idea of the Brain, which is a history of the way people have thought about the brain. And he sort of he said to me that he wasn't really sure how to structure the book until he realized he could do it by what was the leading analogy. Like how did people think about what the brain was? And like, it's astonishing that basically humans have always just picked the most complicated thing that exists and just been like, brains are like that. You know, for some ancient writers, a brain is like a complex sort of musical instrument.
Yeah. I gotta pause it so we can do some reaction. But yeah, I noticed that, like, even with the universe, how it used to be compared to a clock, and then later on it got compared to a computer, you know, and now it's being compared to a quantum computer. And it's the same thing with consciousness. You know, it's like the brain is considered the most complex organ. But I think the mind, or what we call consciousness, I think that's pretty simple. You know, I know brains are very complex, but I think that minds, though, are pretty simple.
Well, let's see. I mean, so I'm trying to think here. So you know, when we think of, you know, fundamental consciousness, or just, you know, pure awareness, it's like we can like strip back intelligence and all these adjectives that describe consciousness is you know, is what you're saying. Like, you know, is that accurate?
Yeah, like, you know, what I always try to do is avoid like some incredulity argument, like, well, this seems too strange or unintelligible, so it can't be real. You know, it's like a gap from imagination to conclusion about reality, you know? So
would you say that another issue with the whole, you know, AI consciousness thing would be that, you know, they're trying to start from the top down? Like, if AI consciousness ever became a thing, like, is it like, it seems like they're just assuming it would be just as complex as human intelligence, or even more complex, where it would be probably a simple sort of consciousness.
Exactly. Like, I've heard other speakers talk about this, and they're saying that actually, these are people that say that LLMs are conscious, and they say that you guys are criticizing us that our systems are not complex enough. But they said that's a big assumption, because what we see is that some forms of consciousness are arising out of simple rules. And they're saying that that's just an argument from incredulity to say that, oh, well, the AIs can't be conscious because they don't look like brains. They don't process like human brains. And they're saying that's just a huge assumption. So it's no wonder you're not getting what you want, because you're not able to mimic a neuron in its complexity, you know. But what some of these guys are saying is that no, AI systems are not conscious because they are so complex. They're conscious despite the fact that they're not complex. They're conscious despite the algorithms, you know.
I mean, I feel like though that the issue that still arises with that, because I mean, I feel like that's a decent argument. It's just, it's like we're still, though, you know, it's in the name, artificial intelligence. It's like, you know, we are judging whether this intelligence is conscious or not, and it's like, you know, it's like if there can be consciousness without intelligence, but this whole thing is based on intelligence, it's just, it becomes really hard to, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I don't have a problem with intelligence. Like, I don't have a problem with the claim that intelligence is not limited to brains, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think cognition exists on a spectrum, and it's just that we can identify it through across biological systems, like cells, tissues, organisms. You know, like cells decide how to organize into structures, tissues regenerate with correct, you know, anatomy and stuff like that. But intelligence and goal-directed behavior are more fundamental than we thought, but it's not necessarily a sign of awareness. There's no, it's just, I only say that because I'm not sure how we've even tested for that.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, it's easy to assume that. But, you know, is it real? Are they really aware? And maybe the awareness, you know, I would think that, you know, if IIT is correct, you know, integrated information theory, that there's always a kind of experience with every system that is able to do intelligent function. That's what it says. It says that consciousness will inhabit any system that has any measure on the spectrum of intelligent behavior. That it's just the other side of the coin always. That's just a brute fact of nature, that consciousness is fundamental to information processing. You know, and that it's kind of like how gravity's fundamental, but you only see it. It only shows up when there's a lot of mass, like with planets and stars and shit like that. But the gravity's always there. It's fundamental, you know, it's always going to show up for planets and large, massive structures. Well, it's the same thing with consciousness. It's fundamental, and it always shows up wherever a system is integrated highly, you know, I guess.
Okay.
So I don't know.
Or for some people, when like mechanical, what's the word, with, you know, pumping air through tubes and stuff, hydraulics, you know, became a thing. The brain began to be seen as this like hydraulic system, and air was being pumped through the veins and stuff. And then we discover electricity, and we're like, oh, the brain is electrical, and we invent computers, and we're like, oh no, it's not like air going through the veins. It's like it's kind of like zeros and ones, and it's like bits, and we start confusing the map for the place, because we start forgetting that this is just an analogy to help us understand. And we'll never know what the next big technology is going to be. But, you know, I like to reflect on whoever it was in like the 1800s or 1900s who said, oh, there's nothing more to invent anymore. Like, we're done. I can't possibly conceive of anything. I think that whatever comes next, we're probably just going to say, no, a brain is a bit like that. But it's...
I mean, it's already happening a little bit, isn't it? I mean, even though computers are still involved
with AI.
We have AI, but we also have things like the internet, these very distributed, self-organizing systems. So the metaphor is beginning to alter, even if it hasn't completely given way to a new technology altogether. But yeah, Matthew's book is great. I think it really makes the point that we always have to be careful not to confuse the metaphor with the thing itself. This is like Whitehead's fallacy of misplaced concreteness as well. We'll get ourselves into trouble. It doesn't mean that the metaphors aren't valuable. And I think the metaphor of the brain as a computer is a particularly tricky one, because it's not just that we're taking a complicated technological system and trying to find the ways in which it might be analogous. The idea of the brain as a computer also draws in all these theorems from computer science and physics about the generality of computation as well. And there's an ongoing debate about what physical processes count as computation. Is everything computational? We have like John Wheeler that everything is computation. It's fundamental. So it's a bit of a trickier one, but I think it's based on two specific events that, when put together, give rise to a strong temptation to think that computation is all there is. And the first of these was from Turing, who basically came up with the idea of an algorithm of Turing of computation according to Turing. This idea of mapping sequences of symbols to other sequences of symbols, and he showed this was very, very powerful with the idea of the universal Turing machine, a machine, an abstract machine that could implement any algorithm.
But what does that mean? Like when you say algorithm, what are you talking about?
Exactly this. An algorithm is something that maps one sequence of symbols through a series of steps to another sequence of symbols, like a mathematical recipe. That's an algorithm. That's, people might use it more loosely, but that's technically, in my understanding, what it is. Mappings from symbols to other symbols. You can do a lot with that, but it's not clear that everything is a matter of mapping symbols to other symbols. And indeed,
I like what he mentioned there, that fallacy of misplaced concreteness. That's kind of normal. Like, you even hear that in school. I remember it took me a long time to figure out my teacher was wrong, because she always say that, like, gas, like, in physics, like, gas are just particles bouncing in space, and I used to really think that's what's going on. But that model is just useful. Even if it's predictive, it's just a useful map, because reality is nothing but particles bouncing, like that model describes as a fallacy. It's not reality. It's a simplification, and a lot of people do that. I think a lot, especially laymen.
Well, I mean, it's like, I remember growing up with how atoms were taught, where it's like, there's the little, ball, or, its nucleus, and then there's these orbits. But then it's like, that's when you look at, when quantum mechanics describes it, it's nothing like that.
It's like, even like in the evolution textbooks, and Kent Hovind really, jumps on this, is that they have like that diagram of like fish, turning into lizards, and turning into, squirrels and elephants, and turning into people, and, monkeys, and then people, like in this straight line, like that's still in the textbooks, but that's not really what's going on. It's more like a bush, not a tree, and but Kent Hovind will always, when he comes on to debate, he'll say, this is what these people believe. You came from an amoeba. When have you seen a dog when have you seen an amoeba give birth to a dog?
Like when evolution doesn't say anything remotely like
nothing like that, but it's still in the textbooks, but it's there as just a useful representation to kind of dumb it down, but it gets so confused, And this really, I think, matters in philosophy of mind. Like what he's talking about, consciousness is just computation. The brain is just the machine. Reality is just physics and equations. How do we know we're not confusing the model of a phenomenon with the phenomenon itself, though? Right.
Mm-hmm.
Turing's classic paper on this, which is now like 90 years old, was motivated by the idea of the halting problem, the idea of showing that there was some, even within computer science, there's some functions which could not be solved algorithmically.
Mm-hmm.
So there are limits even there. But then many things in the real world are not algorithmic, things that are continuous, things that are inherently random, being some examples. So there's more to the universe than Turing computation.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second event was Walter Pitts and Warren McCulloch, right there at the beginning of AI and of cybernetics, who showed that simple neural networks, if you just had these, these computational abstractions, if you like,
mm-hmm.
of artificial neurons that summed up their inputs and generated an output, those could implement logical operations, and given other things like storage and whatever, they could be Turing complete. They could implement any algorithm. And you put these two things together, and they're both really important observations, and you understand that if you strip away everything about the brain apart from, idealize it in terms of this network of neurons that are connected, that just sum up their inputs and pass on outputs,
yeah,
you can get everything that Turing computation can give you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very, very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why.
Hello, my name is Adam Ferrari, the Chief Executive Officer of Phoenix Energy. I look forward to you joining.
Nobody cares.
For decades now, people have sort of thought that we don't have to worry about anything else in the brain. We can throw it all away, because at that level of abstraction, we get everything that Turing computation can offer. That's useful to know, but Turing computation can't do everything, and it's very unclear that it can realize all the properties of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at a brain, you realize that in fact you can't separate what it is from what it does. That really puts pressure on the idea that Turing computation is all that matters.
We talked about this earlier. I mean, you were sort of talking about separating what a thing is from what it does, and we talked about bridges and stuff, but you say in the piece that, like, with a computer, you can separate what it is from what it does, but with the brain, you can't. And I'm still a little bit unclear on, like, what the difference is. And
Okay, so here we go into the real meat of the matter when it comes to physicalism and stuff like that, because there is a difference between function and identity, and but there'll be a little special pleading for the brain, I think, and so that's going to be the issue, I think.
And what you mean specifically, like, maybe you can explain why you can with a brain and can't, or can with a computer and can't with the brain.
It's partly a kind of theoretical thing, and it's partly a practical engineering thing. So the practical engineering thing is computers are useful because they're built this way.
Yeah.
We can run the same program on different computers. They do the same thing. We can run different programs on the same computer, and they'll do different things. They have this kind of perfect interoperability, which makes them useful. And that emerges from the fundamental principle of Turing computation, which is, people argue about it, but there's a general consensus that computation in this sense is supposed to be, at any rate, substrate independent.
Yeah.
That once you define the algorithm,
matter.
That's all you need to know what the system is going to do.
Yeah.
So long as the stuff that's implementing it is capable of implementing it, that's enough. And brains, firstly, evolution didn't design brains for that kind of interoperability. If I took the functional dynamics of my brain, and they don't have to work in your brain, they won't work in your brain, but there was never any evolutionary pressure for that in the first place. In fact, there's evolutionary pressure the opposite direction, because maintaining this sharp separation of scales, insulating one level of dynamics from another, is energetically very expensive. If you just think about a digital computer, it takes energy to make sure that ones remain ones and zeros remain zeros. That's one reason that AI systems are so much more energy inefficient than real brains. If you want energy efficiency, which evolution cares about, and you don't need this sharp separation of scales, you're not going to get it. You're going to get systems where what it does is much more entangled with what it is, because evolution doesn't require there to be a separation. I think even more interestingly, and this is something which I think is a very exciting line of work that's opening up at the moment, there may be functional benefits for systems that are entangled in this way, that are scale integrated in this way. They may be able to do things that are much harder to do in systems where you try and enforce a sharp separation between different levels of dynamics.
Yeah.
If you look at brains, they seem to be like this. In their normal conscious states, they sort of sit in what we call this subcritical regime, where small differences can make differences at larger scales and vice versa. So there's a lot of kind of dependencies across levels of description, which I think is going to turn out to be pretty important in understanding how brains do what they do, whether it's consciousness or cognition.
Mm-hmm. Do you think, I mean, you were talking about like evolutionary pressures to make the brain do particular things. Just more broadly, it might bring to mind the question of evolutionary explanations for consciousness. Like when I've spoken about consciousness and people sort of just say, well, there's got to be some evolutionary benefit. Like that's why consciousness exists, because by being conscious, you avoid pain and you're sort of doing things that help you to survive. And two thoughts come to my mind when I hear this. Firstly, if something is not possible, it doesn't matter if it's evolutionarily beneficial. If matter cannot produce consciousness, it would also be very evolutionarily beneficial if I could make 2 and 2 equal 6, like when I wanted to. But that's not going to happen, even if it's beneficial, right? But more to the point, it seems to me that any kind of evolutionary service that consciousness can provide could also be provided by unconscious reactivity, by the sort of philosophical zombie type figure, or something that doesn't have a complex brain such that it produces experiences, but just that naturally moves away from heat or follows the sun like a flower does in the garden without requiring this thing called consciousness.
Yeah, so that's where the conceivability argument comes in again. So while we can conceive of a philosophical zombie, is it really possible to have one like that? I guess that's why people tend towards AI being conscious, because they're saying, I don't think AIs are philosophical zombies. I think they, if they tell me they're conscious, like some do, some AI systems will say, I'm conscious, I'm having an experience, I feel things, I'm depressed today or whatever, and then some people say, well, it's just telling you that, it's acting like it's conscious, it's really just a philosophical zombie. And other people say that, well, there's no such thing as that, we can conceive of it, but again, we get back into that problem. But I don't know. I think that no one really knows for sure. That's the problem. We just need to come up with a test. Anyways, I'm gonna try to move through this.
Yeah, no, and I mean, yeah, it's these concepts are interesting to think about, but it's like, what does it really move the needle in any meaningful way when you think of, when you can conceive of, oh, there's this other universe that operates exactly like ours, but there is no consciousness, but they act like there is a consciousness, like
yeah, go through some of these I think LMs might struggle with accessing all the driven experience, thought process, and hormonal factors of individuals produce a clear picture of what may be going on. Yep. Roger Penrose has been saying for decades that understanding can't emerge from algorithms. Michael Levin seems to think that machines will always be a bit unpredictable, and there's space for that, for real agency. Yeah. I know. Yeah, this is where philosophy is lacking in regards to actual biology and physics. Yeah, well, philosophy is just to really think about stuff. It's really just to question assumptions, and it's not really testing for anything. So it's a whole different thing. But science is based on a philosophy, that's for sure. There's a philosophy of science. But yeah, philosophy alone won't do it. You got to actually get out there and do the tests and stuff like that. You think AIs have emotions? It's asking delirium drivers, as in someone who steers a car. Yeah, I know what you mean. Anyways, let's go on.
But he talks about how, like, if I played two sequences of like random numbers or words into each of your ears, so different sequence in each ear, and I just told you, just pay attention to the right ear, then afterwards you could recite, the series of numbers, but you wouldn't be able to tell me what the left one was. Whereas if I asked you to focus on the left-hand side, you could do it vice versa. And that just... It's extremely simple. Like, yeah, obviously, I'm focusing on one and not the other, but that just baffles me, because I'm like, well, what's the difference? What is the thing that's changing when I just decide I'm not moving? There's no new information really. I'm just making this decision to sort of, I'm just pushing my attention over here and pushing my attention over there.
That's the difference.
But like
attention,
that just seems such a strange. Like, what do you think attention is? Like, do you think attention is just another kind of brain activity? Do you think it's a sort of pre-brain activity, like qualifier as to how the brain activity occurs? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it seems weird for me to say that attention or focus is just a brain activity, because it seems to be the means through which I determine what brain activity happens. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think that's it. It would be strange if it didn't. I don't think it would have the functional role that it has. I think attention is one of those words. It's only slightly less mysterious than consciousness. But I think it is less mysterious. I think it's less sort of metaphysically loaded. Yeah. But it's one of those things that seems fairly natural. Like, I pay attention to something, but when you ask what that really means, it gets very difficult very, very quickly. But there are lots of ways to study it. I mean, it's one of the classic paradigms. Indeed, as you said, you can pay attention to different streams of sensory information, and that will make a difference to what you can remember, to what you do, and so on, many things.
Mm-hmm.
It is, I think, something that affects conscious experience. We're more likely to be conscious of things we pay attention to. I don't think it's a complete gate. Some people might take an extreme view and say we're only conscious of that which we're paying attention to.
Right.
I think this is probably overstating it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think conscious contents have become dominated by attention. And in the brain, you can think of many ways that might play out. The more extreme views might take it as a sort of really strict gating mechanism that only things you're paying attention to get through the gate and can influence other parts of the brain. I prefer to think of it using the overall framing of this brain as a prediction machine idea, that attention is, firstly, it's not just one thing, it's many things. It's kind of many ways of adjusting the sort of the gain, the signal to noise ratio. How much does the brain update its inferences about what's going on based on some sensory data? Paying attention to something is equivalent to saying, this sensory prediction error, this piece of sensory information is worth, I was going to say worth paying attention to, but that's a bit circular, is going to have more of an impact on the perceptual inference on this sort of continuing unfolding process of prediction error and prediction error minimization.
Yeah. So on this point of the unity of experience.
Yeah, before we go on to that, that's interesting about attention, that what is that? Like, in cognitive science, attention is like, I guess, a selection, like selecting a limited part of, I guess, information that's available, in order to enhance, that one over other parts. Like your senses take in far more data than you can process, but attention is kind of like that filter, right? And I guess, your experience as your world is really shaped by what we pay attention to, because you don't see everything in your visual or sound fields or, thoughts equally, right? So attention is not just a spotlight. It kind of helps construct your experience itself, right?
So more of a metaphysical question, like would something like attention be fundamental to a fundamental consciousness, or can you have consciousness without attention?
Yeah, you can have consciousness, phenomenal consciousness, like a very raw sort of field of awareness without attention. Attention is, like selection within consciousness, right? Like if reality is experiential, then attention is how reality becomes structured within that experience.
But all right, but if let's say that the structure, though, because I'm assuming you would say that consciousness on a fundamental level is structured. It's not just pure chaos, otherwise we wouldn't get the universe that we got. But so if structure is fundamentally part of consciousness, couldn't you say then that this focus would be baked into it?
Well, it kind of derives from experience itself. So like on physicalism, you have matter that evolves to brains, which gives rise to attentions, that gives rise to experience. So on idealism, you would say like, well, there's experience first, which, gives rise to attention, and then structured experience. That's how that would follow, if that makes sense. So what we call objects really may depend on like your sustained attention. Like if you focus on a sound, it becomes a thing, right?
Yeah.
If you shift attention, that thing dissolves into your background. And so that aligns with the idea that objects are just stable patterns in awareness, not independent entities outside of your awareness, right? So I guess the suggestion is that, subject awareness and object is what is experienced are not fundamentally separate, that attention is the mechanism, kind of like descriptions of how one field of awareness may differentiate itself into the foreground or the background,
Well, I'm trying to make sense of this, like with how we've seen the universe unfold, like, because take materialism for example, where it can't explain why there was an asymmetry with matter in the early universe. And so I'm just like trying to think, would you say then like that structure or the focus would be like where that asymmetry comes into place, like?
Yes, because that's what gives rise to duality, that asymmetry. Because that's sort of necessary. It's sort of a contingent thing. Like in order for you to do any sort of sense making, at least the way we do it, like with our trace logic and stuff like that, you have to have more than just one thing. Otherwise, there's no dynamics there, So like, whether you're physicalist or idealist, I mean, we both agree attention really selects what we experience, right? All right. So here's the question. Are you assuming there is an external world already structured independently?
Oh, it happened again. Where you?
Oh, sorry. So like you could ask a physicalist, like, do you assume that there is an external world already structured independently of attention, and that your attention just kind of filters it. So that question really is just sort of trying to find out what assumptions are on the table. Like external world is already formed. Attention is it just like a passive filter, something like that, right? Mm-hmm. So what I guess what you could do is just bring home the point that there is sort of a dilemma. Is attention revealing, like this pre-existing world, or is it participating in constructing what appears as a world? And if they say, well, it reveals a pre-existing world, right? Mm-hmm. Then you can hit them with, then how do you know what part of experience is the world versus just the way your attention organizes it? Because you never access raw reality. You only attend to experiences, or those experiences. And if they say it constructs your experience, then what exactly is this external world doing independently of attention? If everything of it is already structured by attention, right? So there's that pressure point. Either attention is just filtering a fully formed external reality that we never directly access, and we all agree to that, or attention is participating in shaping what counts as reality in our experience, right? Mm-hmm. Like, which one are you actually justified in claiming? And what is that claim based on if all the evidence is already attention mediated? Mm-hmm. That's where the tension comes in.
Okay.
Anyways, let me not rant.
I mean, let's go back to the topic at hand that you have written about and has obviously caught a lot of attention and impressed a lot of people and won a prize for its eloquence. Well, I say for its eloquence, also for its scientific and philosophical rigor. And that's AI consciousness. And we've just been talking about how sort of weird it is to think about where the locus of focus is, where unified conscious experiences might exist and how they interact. And we were on a panel hosted by Brian Cox, A Question of Science, it was good fun. It was a little I remember sort of walking in and Brian sort of being like, let's not talk about this panpsychism
exactly.
stuff. And I was like, okay, because I'd never met him before, so I was just sort of like, hey, so gonna maybe do that anyway, if that's all right with you. It was good fun. And one of the things that I said, and it was kind of tongue in cheek, and I didn't mean for people to laugh, but they did. But it's got a serious point in it, is like, when we talk about AI being conscious, what do we really mean? Like, I know you kind of think it's probably not going to happen, but the thing you're imagining is not happening. I'm like, what really are we talking about? Okay, so ChatGPT becomes conscious. Cool. But as I said on this panel, you've got ChatGPT on your phone, maybe. I've got it on my phone. We've all got our own sort of accounts. I'm having a conversation here. Even within my account, there are multiple streams of conversation. And yet at the same time, like OpenAI's like software and computing power is not stored in my phone. It's stored somewhere else, and my phone is connecting to it. And I'm like, what would it even mean? Would people sort of imagine each individual conversation is like a new conscious being waking up, unaware of the other ones? Or is it like a conjoined twin where they're their own thing, conversations, but they're kind of connected and can kind of interact with each other?
Yeah, that was a good question. I remember watching that panel discussion, and man, he was smoking on that shit. Did you watch that, Neil? Did you get a chance to see that?
I don't think I did. I'll have to check it out.
Oh yeah, you got to, because I think he was the only one. Everybody else were heavy duty physicalists, and he was the one asking all these questions and really pushing back and talking about panpsychism and idealism and stuff. But he did a really good job, man. The audience was just cracking up though.
As audiences do.
Yeah, they're like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Or is there like one chat GPT consciousness that exists wherever OpenAI, San Francisco, whatever is based, and we're kind of interacting with avatars, or like as if the conscious agent is like sending messages back and forth. You know, like how can we even think about what it would look like?
I think this is a great observation. It's David Chalmers has written a nice piece about this. I think it's called "What We Talk to When We Talk to a Large Language Model."
Nice.
And on the one hand, I think all the things you say just highlights the trouble we get into if we get captured by the superficial fact that these things are linguistically competent.
Mm-hmm.
Under the hood, they're massively different. And it's not only now a question of silicon and algorithms, but also, is there an identity? What is the identity over time? What's actually talking to you? It's not the foundation model because that's stable. Is it an instance? Is it a server farm? The server farms.
Right.
You can put a query in. It could be processed in Arizona.
Yeah.
Half in Arizona and half in New York, and maybe the other way around the next time. So it's what's stable. Also, and I think this is key, you can leave a conversation for a day or a year.
Right. And then just come back to it.
Maybe not a year because they'll have changed it, but you come back to it.
Yeah.
And from the seeming perspective of that conversation, that doesn't make a difference. Yet time is fundamental both to how biological brains work and to our experience, to the nature of conscious experience for human beings. So seen that way, I think noting these differences just should highlight the danger of reaching assumptions about AI consciousness on the basis of their fluency with language, their ability to pass the Turing test. But on the other way, I think it's really valuable to sort of set aside, at least temporarily, not forget about, but temporarily set aside the question of whether they are in fact conscious and ask exactly how you put it. For the sake of argument, let's just ponder what it would be like if they were. And I think in doing this, we can probe all these issues, like the unity of consciousness, that we take of as that are so hard to get out from underneath of in the human case.
Yeah.
And then maybe it sort of gives us an insight into a wider space of possible minds. These minds need not be conscious minds, but there is very likely a very large space of possible kinds of minds.
And see, I like that. I do like that idea. That much I agree with him on. And that sort of makes him an idealist in a way, because Michael Levin sort of says the same thing, that, all intelligence and minds, in fact, emerge from other minds. So it defeats that whole strong emergence problem, because, he's not a very big proponent of emergence anyways. But Michael Levin would say, the reason why you can have a range of cognition on a scale like that is because at the lowest levels in biology, there are minds. Now, they may not be conscious minds, but they're minds. They're in that family tree of metaconscious minds, And so it's not that big of a leap to say that metaconscious minds like humans or, highly evolved animals could have emerged from, more primitive, sort of lower on the spectrum kind of cognitive systems, right? And I like that, because at least that gives you a good trace logic,
Yeah, and it seems like he's making a distinction between consciousness and mind, which it seems like idealists do that, make that distinction. Although I feel like there is some confusion with how idealists set it up, because I've noticed that idealists will say, well, there's a distinction between consciousness and mind. And usually the way they describe it is that consciousness is the fundamental field of awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And the mind is, the disassociative, localized, consciousness, or, mind experience. Mm-hmm. and that's fine. And I feel like that was that was even beginning to help me overcome the whole how's there seemingly only consciousness in biological systems when that there's an even simpler consciousness that's fundamental. But then idealists will describe the field, the fundamental field of consciousness, as the mind at large, and so that just brings confusion. Like, they'll say it's different, but then they'll conflate it, and I feel like there's an issue there.
Yeah. That's a really good point. Because like I always say, the way I would put it is that you've got meta consciousness, which is mindful things like the appearance, is being able to think and do certain things. So yeah, your question really points at like this hierarchy problem. Like, how can mind come from consciousness? How can meta consciousness come from mind? I guess it depends on what you mean by consciousness and mind, and different frameworks would invert or eliminate that hierarchy, right? So like, consciousness usually means like raw experience, like what it's like, that phenomenon, right? And then mind usually means like cognition, like thoughts, memory, reasoning, structured mental, activities or concepts. And then meta consciousness usually means like the awareness of being aware, like introspection, right?
Yeah, like,
so
I get, I know that like with meta consciousness, that just usually refers to what seems to be a uniquely human consciousness, are like just how introspective we can be, and we're able to we're able to feel regret, we're able to think of, man, if only I could have done it something different this way. A lot of complexity to meta consciousness.
Right. And you just basically compare the models. Like a physicalist model would be, well, brain builds a model of its own processes. It creates like that sort of metaconscious system where it's like a feedback loop or monitoring itself. And then that all results in this whole, I am aware, then I am aware, Whereas an idealist sort of story would be something like, well, consciousness can reflect upon itself. So awareness becomes self-referential, kind of like a mirror point, recognizing its own reflection. So it's kind of like that. So, you just sort of compare those together. But whether mind comes from consciousness or the other way around depends, I guess, entirely on your metaphysical starting points, right?
So would you say that like saying that there's a distinct difference between the two, but then it seems like idealists will use them interchangeably? Would you say that's just a consequence of there being different schools of thought of idealism?
Yeah. In how they, like I say, how they define those words, like what do you mean by consciousness and mind and stuff like that. But really, like, the direction of explanation just flips depending on your assumption. So what you call mind is either the producer of consciousness or structure within consciousness. Really, just depends on what view you kind of lean towards.
Okay. No, that helps clear up some of the confusion I've been going through. So,
well, this is almost done. Let's see what we can get to this last portion.
You said earlier that you believe in this idea of the controlled hallucination, which you've talked about a bunch, and you talk about it in Being You, your book. And I suppose it might just be helpful for people who are hearing you for the first time on this show to just briefly sort of overview where you're coming from when it comes to consciousness before you start thinking about AI.
Yeah. So the overall perspective I have on consciousness is to be very pragmatic, really. Like, when asked, I describe myself as a pragmatic materialist.
Right.
I don't know that materialism is true, and I don't want to be a person who's sort of out there on the front lines defending materialism against all comers, but I think it's I've always found it a useful perspective to adopt, because it gives us the resources to at least chip away at the problem of consciousness. And by chipping away, I take something like this, what I call the real problem approach. So, consciousness exists, phenomenal realist. It has many different properties. Vision is different from emotion, is different from audition, is different from memory, and so on. What I'm interested in is a kind of unified way of thinking about different kinds of conscious experiences that explains their relation to each other, that explains their character, and that progressively might explain something like their dependence on a particular kind of substrate, whether it's biological or not. The controlled hallucination view is an expression of this. It's really a gloss on a pretty old idea, which is perception as inference, which goes back to, well, in philosophy, back to Kant at least, and the idea that there's a noumenon and a phenomenon. And then in psychology to Hermann von Helmholtz, he was the first person to talk about perception as a process of unconscious inference. So the brain is engaged in trying to infer the causes of sensory signals, but all of that goes on under the hood. It's not even unconscious perception. Those are the unconscious processes that underpin perception. And what we're aware of is the brain's best guess, the brain's what the brain comes to as the most likely interpretation of the causes of the sensory signals that it gets. That's why I call it a controlled hallucination. And it kind of flips what used to be the textbook view of perception on its head. It's classical to think about perception as a process of reading out the world. In this outside-in direction. Information comes into the eyes and is read out by the brain, and you get deeper and deeper, and it reads out more and more complex things. This view goes the other way, and it says the content of our experience, even though it seems to be out there and we sort of passively register it, no, we actively generate it, and the sensory signals are used to calibrate these predictions so that they're useful for the organism.
He's going into what they call the easy problems of consciousness, like all that correlation to what's going on under the hood, which is very reasonable, and it kind of coincides with the integrated information theory that consciousness is all that integration happening, whether consciously or unconsciously, and then your experience is what it feels like to be all that processing, but all that process, those are considered the easy problems, like easily point to that.
And I, from my interactions with you, I've gotten a pretty good idea on how you feel about, metaphysical materialists and materialists who will conflate their ontology with their method. How do you feel about pragmatic materialists?
I go along with that. I even go along with functionalism. I just always keep it within its framework. Like I don't try to confuse it with things that don't apply, like say metaphysical claims. But like I always say, like if I'm talking about correlations and brain activity, then I'm 100% physicalist. In a way, I would be one who's saying, this physical thing, this trace logic works and you can't deny it, so I would sound just like a physicalist. Of course, physicalist isn't about those things. Being a physicalist is really a metaphysical thing. But for what most people think physicalists are, because they conflate the easy problems with, the metaphysical problems. But for all intents and purposes, I'm all for pragmatism, because I use it in my daily life. I'd be a hypocrite to say I didn't. Like, for example, if I'm feeling really tired or in a shitty mood or something like that, I'll go right to the gym and just work out for 10 minutes, really extreme, like do some really extreme cardiovascular shit, like maybe run really fast for 10 minutes or something. And man, that will boost my energy. It'll boost my mood. and I'll go through the rest of my day in a better mental life. My reality has changed, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a pragmatic view, and I'm working within the physics. I'm working with, I'm thinking about my blood, pressure. I'm thinking about being active physically, doing a little resistance training to increase that, your metabolism and stuff like that. All of that plays a role in how you experience, because I also realized that consciousness is that fundamental experience of what all that shit is like. So why not just become that shit so that you can experience that reality, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I definitely go along with pragmatism, and I definitely play the game of physics,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And that's the thing that I think a lot of people misunderstand. Like, they think that, oh, you're saying that consciousness is disembodied and that you have this soul that's unaffected and that it's just out there. And, how do you explain, when you drink alcohol, it damages or changes your conscious experience? Nobody's denying any of that,
Well, I feel like it seems like there's a lot of that due to just how dominant religion has played a role in our history. I mean, because it's to the point where, when you think of idealism, and as an atheist, I'm trying to be open to idealism and not be like, oh, so you're talking about fundamental consciousness. What you're saying is God, and it's like, no, it's like, but I can understand why there is that like knee-jerk reaction to think that, like.
Yeah, I know. And that's why I like to always emphasize I'm an agnostic sort of atheist, regardless of the fact that I'm an idealist. And that kind of makes people wonder, well, how the fuck does that work? Because isn't God a mind essentially? And aren't you really just saying the same thing? But not really, because we don't really know what phenomenal consciousness really is outside of just a very basic, neutral, reflexive kind of thing. It's just a field. It's not necessarily of prayers or has any sort of intention, any of that. Now it may, and I'm all open for that. I mean, but why would you want to? This goes back to parsimony, parsimony.
Mm-hmm.
Why would you want your worldview to include all these unnecessary assumptions?
Yeah, and like the way I try to see it is like, when we traditionally think of the concept of God, most people think of this, I guess you could say, supreme or godlike mind as metaconscious. And sure, there are idealists who will argue that the fundamental consciousness is metaconscious, but there is a whole swath of idealists who would push back against that.
Oh yeah. Those are from the Berkeleyan camp. And Mr. Biscuits, he's a Christian mystic. So he sort of, I guess his whole thing is sort of sounds semantic, because he uses the word being, which in philosophical terms, being just means what is, isness.
Yeah.
So
which I've heard him describe. I do wonder, does he believe metaconscious in fundamental?
No. He believes God is just like a neutral field of awareness.
Okay.
And that we humans and other, sentient agents or whatever, we're kind of like those waves in the whirlpool, so to speak.
So at least when it comes to his worldview and mine, it would, if I were to take be an idealist, it just seems like it comes down to semantics. It's just, he would describe it as God and I wouldn't.
Yeah. That's all. Yeah, that's what I get out of it. And he leans towards, which you heard him say, he's really he resonates with all the different religious traditions, but he just calls himself Christian, I guess, because he's familiar with the teachings, you know, and he can easily kind of make it all work. You know, orthopraxy versus orthodoxy, you know, he talks about. But yeah, anyways, this is almost over.
Yeah, and some of the classic examples of this are things like the checkerboard illusion, you know, which Alex will put up on screen right now. And it's, you know, the two squares which look like they're different colors, but square A and square B on your screen are the same color. And you can prove it with various ways. And if you don't believe us, you know, take it into Photoshop and check it, whatever. And even when you know that, you see them as different colors because your brain is essentially constructing a narrative. Like, why would you want to perceive them as you know, the actual shade of the pixel that's lighting up on your screen? No, it makes sense for your brain to interpret the world in a way that makes sense narratively. And so there's a sense in which, yeah, we are constantly generating the world. The first time we spoke on the show, we talked about like the audio illusions, the Yanni Laurel thing, the brainstorm green needle thing, and some of these, like whichever one you're like looking out for or listening for is the one that you hear. Like you're literally able to construct your perceptual reality. I feel like every time I've heard you talk about the controlled hallucination, I've come a bit closer to kind of understanding where you're coming from. But at the same time, underlying all of this for me is this presupposition that there must be experience. Right? Like I think if you say there is this thing called consciousness, now let's talk about like what it's doing and what its nature is. Like, yeah, there's lots of evidence to suggest that the consciousness is as much outward as it is inward. That's cool. But do you see this controlled hallucination view as also like an explanation of what consciousness sort of is in the first place, or just why, granted the mystery of it existing at all, it presents itself in a particular way?
Yeah, that's a good question. I just think it expresses itself depending on the kind of system that it is. Like you know, it's just like we said, it's on a spectrum. You know, my experience isn't going to even be like yours, or much less like a bat, or right.
Yeah. So, you know, which I think what Alex is getting at is like, you know, so we, you know, there is the experience itself. You know, there is an experience happening, and you know, whatever that experience is, you know, it seems mysterious. You know, whether it's, you know, consciousness or matter, but you know, it would be wrong to say that the experience itself is an illusion, even though the substrate it is using will produce illusions.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me of that physicist Stephen Wolfram, who says that we get reality all wrong because we're just perceiving reality according to the kind of observers we are. Even though they can be consistent and we can tell a consistent story, the logic and all that really doesn't relate to reality. Like reality doesn't give a shit about our logic and shit.
No. That, you know, as Neil deGrasse Tyson put it so eloquently, the universe doesn't owe us an explanation. It doesn't have to make sense to us.
Yeah, he says it's under no obligation to make sense to us. You know, yesterday, here's the funny thing. Dark Light Delirium, he's out there in the live chat, so shout out to you, bro. But he called into Truth Wanted, you know, that atheist show. And he gave his explanation of his theism, you know, and they went back and forth about that. But basically he said, look, man, I'm unlike other theists. I'll just go ahead and admit that I'm just kind of pulling it. And I do have imaginary friends that I talk to, and it's all good, because as long as we're all making shit up, this is my shit. So, and you know, and a lot of them laughed at it. They thought it was absurd or whatever, but I really wanted to react to that video, which I did it with some thoughts. And, you know, my conclusion is, in a way, you know, he's right. I mean, we really, when it comes to these big questions, all we really have is our credulity and incredulity, and, you know, our limitations and all of our pre-assumptions about shit, you know, that go into our worldviews. And like they're talking about here, you know, our perceptions and expectations can sort of shape what we consider as reality, you know, and that explains why everyone has their own different opinions about metaphysics and philosophy and what's real and religions and non-religions, and you know what I mean?
Mhm.
So we are kind of just creating shit out of our ass ultimately. It's just that I guess some stories are better than others, but those depends on what you consider a better story. You know?
Mhm.
Much more the latter.
Yeah.
I don't think it really tells us what consciousness is. Now, I have this ongoing discussion with panpsychist philosophers like Philip Goff, who I know you know, and he will always say to me, in fact, I saw him last week, he will always say to me things like, everything that you materialist oriented
accelerated online tech degrees, ECPI University.
I couldn't spend 4 years.
Scientists come up with about the brain and its relationship to consciousness is completely compatible with something like panpsychism, probably compatible with idealism and other things as well. And I think that's probably true. I have no reason to doubt it. But the question for me is a pragmatically materialist view, well, I don't know what things really are. I mean, as you said many times on podcasts with guests, that you can take a chair apart, you find molecules, you take molecules apart, you find atoms, you take those apart, protons, quarks, quantum fields. What actually is?
Yeah, right.
Is something I'm certainly not qualified to answer. Is it mental states? Is it stuff that has, in addition to physical fundamental properties, qualitative conscious properties as well? I don't know. But the thing is, I think a pragmatic materialism that says at the level of analysis that we currently are interested in, or I am interested in, which is brains are made of stuff. And I tend to be more interested than most people in what they're made of too, and not treating them again as just computers that happen to be made of meat.
Yeah.
Am I moving the needle on explaining properties of the phenomenon? Or am I barking up the wrong tree entirely and making matters worse?
Yeah.
So imagine a kind of controlled experiment. You take a bunch of scientists who have a sort of panpsychist outlook, and you take another bunch of scientists who have a materialist outlook, both sort of pragmatically held, just they don't really know, but that's their predilection. And then you let them loose to construct their theories and do their experiments. And then you come back in 50 years. And you see, from some view from nowhere, metaphysical view from nowhere, which group has come up with better, again, criterion not defined, better account of consciousness, made more progress. I don't know the answer to that. But my suspicion is that, at least from where we are now, we get further with a materialist outlook.
Yeah, and I agree to that. Like, I think that pragmatic materialism works. I just call it methodological naturalism, where you can test things and make predictions, and it works, and it progresses us ahead and all of that. I have no problem with that. Hey, Robin, how you doing? Thanks for joining.
Hey, I didn't know how much longer you had on the video. I had something like me and Skyworks and Dane were talking about in chat, and it was.
What's going on?
Well, like Skyworks made this. It said, "I'm the opinion that there is an accumulated collective consciousness, which is just the bank of all ideals and experiences that are related to each other and absorbed as we travel through life. And I just was like, I come in this, if I thought y'all were almost done with this, that's what I was gonna comment on, because I watched some I watched a lot of animal videos. And I watched something really interesting. You know, the anacondas down in Florida that had been taking over it down there. And, like for a long time, there was just nothing that any animal species down there was able to do about this this species that was so invasive, and it was just wiping out much of these populations of smaller animals. And I watched a video the other day, though, that suddenly there has been a decline in the growth of these these snakes. You know, there's been a decline, and so they started studying it. And there's like 3 or 4 different species of animals that have began over time to participate in certain things that are making the numbers in these snakes decline. And I thought it was really weird. I mean, it took quite a little bit amount of time before these animals gained the knowledge to do this. But it was, I mean, obviously they're teaching one another to do it. Like the coyotes can sneak up on the snake at a certain angle after it's eaten.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have a real wide, vision, and the coyote can strike it and like take its head off with one strike. The otters are like wiping out the eggs, a whole nest of eggs. They can, because these snakes lay around 100 eggs at a time, and like a group of otters can go in and wipe out a whole nest of eggs in just one thing. And so I thought that was really weird that like these different animal species have have learned these practices and started developing these things. And I just thought that was really interesting. And that just, when Skyworks made that comment there, that made me just think of that.
Yeah. Are you familiar with Rupert Sheldrake?
No.
I think you would really like that guy. He's a scientist, and he gives TED Talks, and he talks a lot about examples in nature of collective consciousness at work.
Yeah.
And he'll talk about ant colonies and flocking and schooling behavior with birds and fish and stuff, or human crowd synchrony, and how primates kind of evolve in their social intelligence. So it's kind of like group knowledge behaves like an evolving system within itself. And then it remembers, that's the really cool thing, is that nature sort of remembers all these patterns that get repeated throughout nature. And it's an expansive view of consciousness. It's like, well, consciousness, it exists within individuals and individual brains and embodiments, but it also sort of transcends into social groups and tribes and societies and even the world. Like, I think that's the whole basis of the whole Gaia movement, like there's just this entire morphic field that Rupert Sheldrake, that's what he calls it, a morphic field, where collective patterns sort of emerge without any central control. And there's so many examples of that. It's really cool.
I think that, like, I don't know if you remember, like, not too long ago, a couple of years ago, when the orcas were like striking the boats.
Yes. Yep.
And there was like, the one maternal, like the one female that was kind of like training the other ones to do that. And to me, we think about that stuff in humans, because we orally and can write down stuff and pass along these kind of things, this information. But it's really interesting when you see animals who are able to do it with what we consider far inferior, communication processes. So,
yeah, exactly. How's it going, Dark Light? Nice to see you, brother. How you doing today, man?
Good, man. I appreciate you doing a reaction to my segment on Truth Wanted. My narcissism appreciates that, man. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, no worries. No worries, brother.
Actually, I'm going to do a reaction to your reaction, because I was going to do a reaction to that segment, but I'd much rather do a reaction to your reaction. That way it's kind of like we're going over it together.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, definitely, man. That'd be a lot of fun. Because I thought you did good, man. I mean, I already knew who you are and your whole theology, and we've talked about it a few times. And I was just really expecting, I got exactly what I was expecting from the Objectively Dan and the other guy. And it's just so, it's so embedded how everyone sort of relies on, their arguments and their logic and their frameworks to really, try to debunk shit, and it's just so interesting that the things that we claim about each other applies equally to ourselves, but we're part though. And I like how you put it out there. You're like, look, I'll be the first to admit I'm pulling this shit out my ass. It's a lot of it has to do with imagination and stuff like that. Like, dude, kudos for that, man.
Well, that's the thing, is we all are pulling it out of our ass. Just very few people realize it. People think it's better to pull some shit out of someone else's ass instead of pulling it out their own ass,
Exactly. That's the thing.
They're like, my ass isn't worthy to pull shit out of. I must pull shit out of other people's asses. Nah, my ass is worthy.
Well, I mean, I think we have certain things that we have consistently been able to show are part of reality, and right now, like I see your ideals as pretty benign. I mean, you're not trying to restrict women's, bodily autonomy or what's taught in schools or whether we should be participating in a war between,
I don't have any scriptures or dogmas which commands, demands, or justifies harming my fellow man. That's a big difference.
So I see your beliefs is totally benign, and so I don't see any reason why I would have a problem with. But we do have a lot of people who have just decided that they can just make up a lot of stuff, like they could, and some of it's harmful.
It's one thing to make up stuff. It's a whole other thing to make up stuff and then insist that other people capitulate to it. Because that's one thing that was pissing me off during my call up there is they kept saying your religion, your religious views. I'm anti-religious. And then when I told him that, he got mad at me and said, "No, you are religious. You have stuff that you wrote down that makes you religious." So following that same framework, then science itself is a religion, because science has all kinds of axioms and stuff wrote down. But most skeptics will say, no, science is not a religion. So equally applying logic, if you're going to say science is not a religion, then you can't sit there and tell me that what I have come up is necessarily a religion. It's only a religion if I am forcing it on others, like, hey, this is the ultimate truth. This is just my personal truth. It's how I'm trying to understand the world,
Yeah, I wouldn't say you have a religion. No, I it's not by any means, not any definition of the word. You have
I call it a theology. I have a mental framework. I have a conceptual framework I'm building, but it's also open to change. I have changed it a little bit in the last year. I've added stuff to it. I've thought about it more. I've manipulated it. And that's another big difference between my theology and Abrahamic theologies is theirs isn't allowed to change, right? That's what they say, but they make changes to it all the time.
Yeah. You have spiritual beliefs, not actual religion. And
Yeah. And I do apologize if I have a little background noise around me. I am here at a gas station.
No problem, man. No problem at all. Yeah, we all, you know, we all sort of have to build our, you know, philosophy based on our own personal experiences and things like that. Those are the things that motivates us. And you know, you can do all that and at the same time admit it. You can admit that, you know, I'm limited to my limited amount of experiences on life. You know, if you've got kids, you know all that shit all too well. Like I've got kids who think they know it all, and they're only like 18, 19 years old. It's like, dude, keep on living, man. You're gonna realize a whole lot more, and they just can't see it. They're like, yeah, but I don't know. I don't understand what you mean because I've never experienced. I don't know what you're talking about. It's like, well, all I can say, man, is just keep living, man. You'll get there one day.
You'll circle back around and be like, you were fucking right.
Yeah, they'll always do that. Like, and they'll do that from time to time. Yeah, Dad, you were right about that. You know, girls can be mean. Men can be assholes, Dad.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's what it sounds like is that you have a philosophical, metaphysical worldview, but not all philosophical views are religious views. And
that's right.
I feel like, you know, sure, under a certain definition of religion, what you have is a religion, but then to me, like, that's not a really useful definition of religion, where it can be just so broadly used.
Well, like I told Dan, I said, if you want to identify me as religious, that's fine, but I don't identify as religious. You know, that's what I told Dan.
Yeah. Well, it's like when religious people want to try and claim that atheism is a religion, they always go to the definition of an interest, cause, belief, or activity that is intensely or passionately held. And it's like, well, that covers everything.
I recently had a debate over this. I debated a creationist over is evolution a religion, and
I was there for that one. I've been hitting up your lives, Robin.
Yeah, I don't think that he had any argument at all that you know made me think in any way that evolution is a religion.
Yeah, so my main channel is shut down, and I've been afraid to post on my other channels because I do have other channels, but I'm afraid to post on there because luckily YouTube just shut my channel down, so I can't upload, but they didn't erase it all. So I'm waiting to back up all my content before I start posting on my other channels, just in case they retroactively go back and erase my main channel, because I got so much fucking content on there, you know, I can't risk losing it. I need to save all that. So because I've not made a single penny off of any of my content. I got 750 videos, hundreds of hours worth of content, haven't made a single penny. I just hit 200 subscribers after 3 years, you know, which I was never going for any of that anyway. What I'm going for is just authentic expression. My channel has just been a document, like a living autobiography, essentially. Just tracking the lessons of my life is all my channel has been. So I'm working on, I want to build a website to put all my content on. And I'm also considering making my own app. I'm thinking about making my own app. I want to call it Real on Real, where, because there's so many creators on YouTube that get swept under the rug, they don't get any attention, and it's just real people doing real shit, and that's what YouTube used to be. But it seems like these days that's exactly now YouTube is against that. So I want to create a place, an app, a content creation app, and also an idea sharing app where people can come together, share ideas, and just be their real authentic self. So that's something I'm kicking around. It's going to be expensive to get started, but that's something I'm thinking of.
That's cool, man. Skyworks asked, does your view involve the idea of God or gods?
I like to say it like this: God is my least favorite term for what I call it. What my favorite term is the fractal singularity omnimatrix, but I still use the term God because I'm trying to redefine it and take it back from the damage that has been inflicted upon that term by followers of Abraham. So yes, I would absolutely say I use the term God, and I say that we are all a fractal extension of God. God is living through our lives. essentially I am a true monotheist, but like that's one way that Dan was falsifying. Like when I first came on there, I said I'm a non-Abrahamic true monotheist, and he's like, "Well, you're telling me what you're not, but why don't you tell me what you are?" But in there, I was telling you what you are, what I am, which is a true monotheist. I just have a totally different concept of what that means than followers of Abraham, which is why I have to say non-Abrahamic true monotheist, because they have done such a good job at monopolizing that very term, true monotheist. And as soon as you say that, people automatically assume that you're of the Abrahamic version, you know?
Yes, yeah.
So
I like when you like when you engage with Abrahamic religious people. I like to, because they get really blown out of the water pretty quick on what's
there's certain one, as long as they're cool with me, I'm cool with them. But if they come at me sideways at all, I will jump their ass. So like that Peter dude that was automatically, that's why I jumped on a couple days ago. That Peter dude was automatically coming at Robin sideways. I'm like, oh hell no, I'm gonna eat this motherfucker's ass, dude.
Oh, that one that thought because I was a witch.
Yeah, well, you said I used to be a witch, and then he was ad hominem you right off the bat. And it's funny, he was scoffing and ad hominem, but as soon as I came on and started eating his ass, then now he wants to play the victim, you know?
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate you coming in to do that too.
Yeah.
Like, and I understand that thing about God. Like, I mean, like in nature, like, you know, we think about, like, you can ask the question, like, you know, in nature, what exemplifies intelligence in nature? Like, what in nature looks like intelligent goal making, you know, like choosing goals like a mind would choose it. Like, do you see that goal-like behavior through nature, evolution, stuff like that? And, you know, you can see clear cases that I would argue sort of support your view there. Like we were just talking about, like ant colonies. Colonies aim to find food, build nests, defend territory without a central planner, right? The colony behaves like a goal-directed intelligence, you know, bird migration, predation strategies. Like, you know, I think we were talking about the anaconda, but you can look at like the wolves, the lions, you know, how they coordinate hunting. They sort of have like that system level goals. No individual really decides the group goal explicitly, yet the group does things, intelligent things, you know?
Yeah.
So you can kind of see that, you know?
Another example that I've learned it recently too, that it's kind of blows my mind, is coyotes. Like, and this is one reason why, like, if you live in
Coyotes are highly intelligent. They are highly intelligent.
Yeah, if you live anywhere where coyotes are and you have like outside dogs, you have to be really careful with them, because coyotes will send, like, I don't know, I guess it's send, but a female who is like in heat will go in around and be friendly with like pets and stuff. And if there's male dogs there, she will lure them away from the house and for the pack to attack. Now, how, like that,
where I live, there's all kinds of coyotes too, and I've been lucky with that. But that is so true. There's coyotes out the ass out here in the Ozark Mountains.
Yeah, here too. And it just the fact that they will, you know, the female will go in there and actually, you know, knowing that they can lure the pet away from the house, and like it, you know, I mean, it's. I don't know how they do it. Like, you know, do they communicate this to each other or whatever? I don't know how that happens, but somehow the female knows to do that and lures the pet away from the house, and the pack can attack the pet. So,
yeah, like, have you ever heard of epigenetics?
Yeah.
Like, you know, what's really kind of cool is like they did an experiment with mice and over generations. So like they would do this little shot thing where they would lead the mice, you know, there was a corner in the cage where there was water, and every time they go to this particular water, they would get a shock. So they wouldn't want to get water from that spigot. They'd want to get it from this other place, right? And so they kind of learned it. But then their children and grandchildren that were born automatically, never drank out of the spigot, even though they had no direct experience of being shocked. They kind of just learned through epigenetics, is what the researchers say, that it's just, that's the proof that epigenetics, you can actually transfer experiences to your offspring, naturally. So
yeah, it's wild, isn't it?
It's really weird because it's like because epigenetic is really just the changes or the study of changes in how genes are turned on or off without changing the DNA itself. So they're influenced like through stress, diet, parenting, trauma, all that stuff, and they're inheritable,
And there's also the 100th monkey experiment where you don't even need genetics themselves to transmute a lesson learned. Have you heard of that? The 100th monkey experiment?
Yes. Yep. Rupert Sheldrake talks about that too. Environmental experience influence gene regulation patterns, right?
Yeah. So that just kind of proves because everything is fields. You have the atomic fields, which because everything's a fractal. I call it the fractal singularity omnimatrix, and that is everything within nothing. See, it's one of my theories. Now, this is just a theory that everything exists at the same time and place simultaneously. Okay, and the speed of light, because it's one of my theories that light doesn't actually move. Okay, the darkness moves the light. The darkness in between the light is what actually moves. The light itself doesn't move. These are all theories, but all light particles are just a holographic fractal extension of what I call the allspark. So if you change the speed of light or the pressure of darkness one slightest fraction, you are now in an alternate dimension. Okay, and all these different dimensions are at the same time and place simultaneously. So these are just some theories that I've been kicking around right here.
Yeah, it goes along with
hypothesis.
Yeah, hypothesis, and but entanglement is a thing. So it's a good hypothesis because it's building on things that we know rather than just things maybe we don't. But have you guys ever heard about the experiment with the decapitated flatworms?
No.
Okay, so they're called planaria, which are called flatworms. The thing is, if you cut them into pieces, each piece will regenerate back into a full worm, right? So even like small fragments can regrow heads, tails,
like
organs.
The head off a hydra.
Yeah, like you can cut it off and it'll grow back, like headless fragments, will grow back. But the really cool thing about that is there was a test, and because there's this whole idea of what we're talking about, this collective consciousness sort of thing, where they were saying, well, is there like pattern memory that we can test for? Like you couldn't do that obviously with most animals, but the good thing about the flatworm is you can cut his head off, and you can the experiment was, let's train the flatworm. We know that all the neurons are in his head. It's got a little brain-like thing. All its neurons are right there in its head. So if you cut it off, it regrows a new head. Well, it doesn't know anything. It's starting from a clean slate again, right? So what they did is they trained the flatworm, and then they decapitated it. So it lost its brain, and then it regenerated its head. So the goal was to see what was going to happen. Could they remember its training? And of course, it remembered its training.
What did it train it to do? What did they train the worm to do? Like,
I think it was just like how to. It created like these goals, like where to find particular food or energy, and just trained it like to to solve certain problems.
Reward or something.
Yeah, like let me see if I can find it. Let me find
I didn't know worms could problem solve. I mean, I didn't. That's interesting.
Oh yeah. Hold on, I'm gonna find this.
I know some bird species are really good at that. And, to me, and I don't know. I need to probably check on this. But to me, it seems like with all of these kind of different examples coming out, that maybe all animals seem to be gaining more consciousness or whatever. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I mean, it's it tells you a little bit about the nature of reality, and that's why I say that it seems like consciousness has a huge role in biological life, at least,
well, yeah, I think that our consciousness was very, very, big on us being able to survive. Like, I think that being aware of our surroundings and being able to react differently to different stimuli or different, dangers is something that was necessary. Like you were talking about a while ago, though, like when we don't always or when, like what he was talking about a while ago, when we don't pay attention to like the left side, what we're hearing on the left side, because I think attention or focus is very caloric expensive. And so we don't just default into that position, without having to make that choice, because I think that uses up a lot of our resources.
Let me play this video real quick. I think you'll like this, Robin. It's really interesting.
And there's several amazing things about planaria, but basically they kind of, I think planaria hold the answer to pretty much every deep question of life. For one thing, they're similar to our ancestors. So they have true symmetry. They have a true brain. They're not like earthworms. They're much more advanced life form. They have lots of different internal organs, but they're these little, they're about, maybe 2 centimeters in the centimeter to 2 in size. They have a head and a tail. And the first thing is planaria are immortal. So they do not age. There's no such thing as an old planarian. So that right there tells you that these theories of thermodynamic limitations on lifespan are wrong. It's not that, well, over time of everything degrades. No, planaria can keep it going for probably, how long have they been around? 400 million years, right? So these are so the planaria in our lab are actually in physical continuity with planaria that were here 400 million years ago.
So there's planaria that have lived that long. Essentially, what does it mean, physical continuity?
Because what they do is they split in half. The way they reproduce is they split in half. So the planaria, the back end grabs the petri dish, the front end takes off, and they rip themselves in half.
But isn't it in some sense we're like you are a physical continuation?
Yes, except that we go through a bottleneck of one cell, which is the egg. They do not. I mean, they can. There's certain planaria that
got it. So we go through a very ruthless compression process, and they don't.
Yes, like an autoencoder, sort of squash down to one cell and then back out. These guys just tear themselves in half, and so the other amazing thing about them is they regenerate. So you can cut them into pieces. The record is, I think, 276 or something like that by Thomas Hunt Morgan, and each piece regrows a perfect little worm. They know exactly, every piece knows exactly what's missing, what needs to happen. In fact, if you chop it in half, as it grows the other half, the original tissue shrinks so that when the new tiny head shows up, they're proportional. So it keeps perfect proportion. If you starve them, they shrink. If you feed them again, they expand. Their anatomical control is just insane.
Somebody cut them into over 200 pieces.
Yeah. Thomas Hunt Morgan did.
Hashtag.
How do you kill them?
I know, right? How would you kill one of those if you can?
I don't know.
That's crazy, isn't it? We need to use their genes to do some shit.
Science.
Yep. Amazing. Yeah, and maybe more. I mean, they didn't have antibiotics back then. I bet he lost some due to infection. I bet it's actually more than that. I bet you could do more than that.
Humans can't do that.
Well, yes. I mean, again, true, except
Maybe
that
you can at the embryonic level.
Well, that's the thing, right? So I tell when I talk about this, I say just remember that as amazing as it is to grow a whole planarian from a tiny fragment, half of the human population can grow a full body from one cell, right? So development is really, you can look at development as a just an example of regeneration.
Yeah, to think, we'll talk about regenerative medicine, but there's some sense what would be like that worm in like 500 years, where I can just go regrow a hand.
Yep, with given time, it takes time to grow large things, but
for now,
right? You can just see it. And then we said, okay, well, now let's test the idea that that's a memory that actually controls where the head and the tail goes. Let's change that pattern. So basically incept a false memory. And so what you can do is you can do that in many different ways. One way is with drugs that target ion channels to say, and so you pick these drugs and you say, okay, I'm going to do it so that instead of this one head, one tail electrical pattern, you have a two-headed pattern, right? You're just editing the electrical information in the network. When you do that, guess what the cells build? They build a two-headed worm. And the coolest thing about it, now no genetic changes, so we haven't touched the genome. The genome is totally wild type. But the amazing thing about it is that when you take these two-headed animals and you cut them into pieces again, some of those pieces will continue to make two-headed animals. So that information, that memory, that electrical circuit, not only does it hold the information for how many heads, not only does it use that information to tell the cells what to do to regenerate, but it stores it. Once you've reset it, it keeps. And we can go back. We can take a two-headed animal and put it back to one-headed. So now imagine, so there's a couple of interesting things here that have implications for understanding of genomes and things like that. Imagine I take this two-headed animal. Oh, and by the way, when they reproduce, when they tear themselves in half, you still get two-headed animals. So imagine I take them and I throw them in the Charles River over here. So 100 years later, some scientists come along and they scoop up some samples and they go, oh, there's a single-headed form and a two-headed form. Wow, a speciation event. Cool. Let's sequence the genome and see what happened. The genomes are identical. There's nothing wrong with the genome. So if you ask the question, so this goes back to your very first question, is where do body plans come from, right? How does the planarian know how many heads it's supposed to have? Now, it's interesting because you could say DNA, but what as it turns out, the DNA produces a piece of hardware that by default says one head. The way that when you turn on a calculator, by default, it says 0 every single time, right? When you turn it on, it just says 0. But it's a programmable calculator, as it turns out. So once you've changed that, next time it won't say 0. It'll say something else. And the same thing here. So you can make one-headed, two-headed. You can make no-headed worms. We've done some other things along these lines, some other really weird constructs. So this question of, right, so again, it's really important. The hardware software distinction is really important because the hardware is essential, because without proper hardware, you're never going to get to the right physiology of having that memory. But once you have it, it doesn't fully determine what the information is going to be. You can have other information in there, and it's reprogrammable by us, by bacteria, by various parasites, probably, things like that. The other amazing thing about these planarias, think about this. Most animals, when we get a mutation in our bodies, our children don't inherit it, right? So you could run around for 50, 60 years getting mutations. Your children don't have those mutations because we go through the egg stage. Planaria tear themselves in half, and that's how they reproduce. So for 400 million years, they keep every mutation that they've had that doesn't kill the cell that it's in. So when you look at these planaria, their bodies are what's called mixoploid, meaning that every cell might have a different number of chromosomes. They look like a tumor. If you look at the genome is an incredible mess because they accumulate all this stuff. And yet their body structure they are the best regenerators on the planet. Their anatomy is rock solid, even though their genome is all kinds of crap. So this is kind of a scandal, right? That, when we learn that, what are genomes do? Well, genomes determine your body. Okay, why does the animal with the worst genome have the best anatomical control, the most cancer resistant, the most regenerative, right? Really, we're just beginning to start to understand this relationship between the genomically determined hardware and by the way, just as of a couple of months ago, I think I now somewhat understand why this is, but it's really a major puzzle. And
this was like 3 years old, and I think he was kind of reluctant at that time to talk about, this Platonic bioelectric pattern sort of thing. But now he's sort of explicit about all that. But that's his hypothesis for why all that stuff can work the way it does, without just the hardware of the DNA, so to speak, I guess. But yeah, it brings up a whole lot of questions about evolution, Nell. And I know that you're really that's your kind of specialty is evolution. And we get a lot of questions from like theists and creationists that'll point to like, how did nature become so sophisticated? Why does it, fit all of these things? I mean, some of these arguments are just childish, but some of them are really challenging, And I think that the more we learn about maybe what he's researching, it could kind of shed light on there actually is some sort of intelligent directness, but it's within nature and physics itself. It's not necessarily from like some sort of God that's sitting on a cloud or something like that.
I feel like there's a misunderstanding. Like, it's like creationists want to say, something like epigenetics disproves evolution. It's like that's not how that works. It's like
right.
If evolutionists were saying that the only thing that matters is natural selection and mutation, then there would be a problem. But it's like those are not the only mechanisms that drive evolution. And it's like if we're looking at the whole picture of evolution, that would include epigenetics. Yeah.
Are you familiar with quantum biology?
Not super familiar with it.
Yeah, so this is really interesting, is that they're able to pinpoint quantum effects in things like DNA, photosynthesis, a lot of things that are kind of key to evolutionary sort of systems.
Mm-hmm.
And so things like quantum tunneling, entanglement play a big role in like some biological processes, right? So a lot of that could account for some of the big leaps that you see in the fossil record, because that's really what quantum tunneling is all about. Like when you see that in photosynthesis, basically energy from the light enters a plant like molecule, and then it moves through a network and transfers that energy to create like multiple paths more efficient, where under classical sort of processing would take thousands of years, but this does it almost instantaneously through quantum tunneling, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of matters for evolution, because if quantum coherence improves efficiency, then it would cause the plants to capture energy, survive better, and reproduce.
Mm-hmm.
So natural selection could favor biological structures that exploit those sort of quantum effects, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm
a lot of the questions these creationists have.
I mean, I'm pretty fascinated to want. I mean, I'm curious as to just how much the quantum realm affects, things on the macroscopic scale. How it affects evolution. Because I've heard people say that, things happening at that level shouldn't affect things happening at our level, but like, it seems like every day that's being questioned and being proven wrong. So
yeah, I mean, you got to look at it like it is a thing. Like they even there's one specialist who talks about, if you look on YouTube, you look up quantum biology,
mm-hmm.
and you'll find let me pull it so I can get his name, because I'm not a quantum expert. So I would just defer you to the experts. And I think one of the guys that talks, Jim Al-Khalili. And here, let me just put it out here really quick. I'm gonna get off here soon, but I'll show this just so you'll know what I'm talking about.
Audience, I'd say it's not what many people might think, that
at the very deepest level, if you look into a living system, a living cell, down to the level of molecules and atoms, then you hit the quantum world, because that will be true for life as well as for inanimate matter, where the quantum rules kick in. Now, quantum biology, as we define it today, means exploring the mechanisms and phenomena that rely on non-trivial quantum effects within living cells. By non-trivial, I mean quantum tunneling, long-lived quantum coherence and superposition, quantum entanglement even. These are surprising effects that we're now seeing taking place within living organisms. That is quantum biology. We tend to think about quantum biology as being quite a new area of interdisciplinary science, and in many ways it is. But actually it has rather old origins, going all the way back to the early 1930s. In fact, we can even trace it back to a particular lecture that Niels Bohr gave at a conference in 1929. He hinted at the idea, as many of the quantum pioneers were doing back then, that maybe quantum mechanics holds the key to so much of science, and the fact that quantum mechanics, in their opinion, solve the problems of physics and chemistry, they arrogantly then assumed that it could also be used to tackle the mystery of life itself. And so Bohr was one of these early quantum pioneers who suggested maybe quantum mechanics could play a role. And he inspired other physicists, particularly people like Max Delbruck, who then changed field and became a biophysicist working in molecular biology, and also Pascal Jordan. Now, Jordan is most famous because he was one of the authors on the classic papers on quantum mechanics, on matrix mechanics, with Max Born and Werner Heisenberg in Göttingen. Jordan, I guess, is lesser known than Born and Heisenberg, but he's certainly one of the names of the quantum pioneers of the 1920s. Jordan really, in a sense, was the founder of the field of quantum biology. He was looking for rules from the quantum world, such as indeterminism, complementarity, ideas that he had developed by studying under Bohr, and whether they applied and played a vital role in life.
But see, the problem was that in quantum mechanics, that deals with the very small microscopic systems. And so it's always been kind of looked at suspiciously that there could be quantum effects in, the warm, wet world of biology. And that's always been why it's taken so long to even be taken seriously. But that's the thing about incredulity. You want to make sure you keep your mind open and you can explore anything, That's what it is. But, a lot of people just reject it outright because they just can't imagine,
Yeah. Well, I mean,
in fact, Pascal Jordan probably published.
Go ahead, Neil.
I was just going to say, this seems like maybe then like quantum biology would be something we could like set aside for, its own entire show or something.
Yeah, I would definitely like to do that because it really is a thing, and look at it, check it out. It's kind of cool stuff. It is a legitimate discipline. So I remember at first when it was before photosynthesis was discovered, it was always looked at as like tinfoil hat type shit. But then we have photosynthesis, and then it's just gone on and on. Different examples, enzymes, DNA, bird navigation. There's all sort, the sense of smell. All of that stuff goes back to quantum effects, So it's really, really interesting. Anyways, I'm gonna have to get on off of here, man, and get on with the rest of my day. That's why I wanted to start kind of early today. But I appreciate you coming through.
Yeah, no, it was nice tackling the video and exploring consciousness, and how it might apply to AI or not.
Yeah, exactly. And Skyworks asked me, how do you know whether you're reading what he's claiming or stating correctly, Scott, and that you're not applying your misunderstanding of the fossil record to what he's saying incorrectly? I will tell you that because I've read a lot about it. That's why. And again, don't take my word for it. I'm not inviting you to take my word for it. I would look it up yourself, you know, and see what the what it's all about, you know. I really try to be careful with my words. I really don't like to make leaps and say and exaggerate. I have no reason to do that. But I mean, really, quantum biology really does show that some biological processes do exploit quantum phenomena like tunneling and coherence. And they improve efficiency, function. Natural selection can act on them, meaning, you know, like quantum physics becomes part of the mechanistic substrate through which all of this evolution seems to operate. Not a replacement, but, you know, quantum biology doesn't change evolution. It just adds a deeper layer that I think evolution can and did optimize. So that's based on, I'm not just, you know, making that up. That's just based on what I've ever read or looked at. But anyways, I'm going to get on out of here, man. And I appreciate you guys coming through. If you're new to the channel, like and subscribe. And until next time, we'll see you later.
See you.